Okay, we're live. Good morning to everybody. Welcome to Saturday Free School, January 17th, 2026. We're gonna talk about a lot of things today. I think maybe framed around one, the deepening civilizational crisis in the U.S. And so we're going to continue the discussion of Emmett Till, Natasha McKenna, and connect it to Renee Good, the white woman who was killed by ICE in Minneapolis. But before we get to that, we're also going to talk about the 32 martyrs who were killed by the U.S. in its attack against Venezuela and the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro and the return of their bodies to their homeland in Cuba, and draw all this together. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Doc.
Thanks a lot, and good morning to everybody. If you weren't here last week, it was a really wonderful event with the Freedom School from Mother Bethel, and Mother Bethel Free School and the Nation of Islam and other people. So it was really a very beautiful gathering, and I hope we can go forward and build upon it. Yes, you all might remember on January 3rd, when we had Free School, we were shocked by the fact that Trump and his administration and the military had invaded Venezuela and kidnapped Nicolas Maduro, the president of a sovereign nation, in violation of all kinds of international laws and of the spirit of human morality, which we'll come back to. But in the process of capturing Nicolas Maduro, 32 Cuban international combatants were killed, both men and women, who were part of a security brigade for Maduro. They were caught, it seems, off guard in a plan of betrayal of Maduro, but the Cubans fought like lions, and they died on the battlefield of morality. But the Cubans, many decades ago, had demonstrated on the battlefield of struggle against imperialism that the Cuban Revolution distinguished itself by its moral superiority and the fact that the moral character of Cuba is defined by the fact that Cuba stands with humanity and oppressed humanity wherever they might be. Cuba, thus, over the decades since its revolution, has established itself as a unique and specific moral force in the world, perhaps unprecedented.
Yeah.
No people, no nation has sacrificed more or done more for others, especially the oppressed, than have the Cuban people. In this respect, special role of Fidel Castro as a moral exemplar for humanity and a force for the moral remaking of the world cannot be underestimated, especially in this year of the 100th anniversary of his birth, which we will celebrate. Fidel and the Cuban Revolution established that morality is a condition of revolution, certainly to sustain a revolution. Without a moral compass, without a moral essence, revolutions tend to be undone by their own people. Morality and the moral imperative is the revolutionary imperative. For Fidel, the Cuban Revolution is a moral project as much as it is anything else. And so we can see, for those who wish to see, that there is a link between the exemplary behavior of Fidel Castro and that of Martin Luther King Jr. And therefore, when we say that Martin Luther King is the father of a new American nation, if there is to be a new American nation, is our way of saying that the American Revolution has to be founded upon the moral remaking of the people and the nation, as we have said before. And in the same way, Fidel Castro is the father of the Cuban nation. Just want to state once again that the Cuban fighters fought like lions. They did not surrender even when outnumbered and surrounded. Let us not forget this. They fought to the death, and I am certain that they took to their graves betrayers of the Venezuelan Revolution and whatever Americans showed up. I have spent time in Cuba. I have been with Cubans in Ethiopia and Angola and Vietnam. I've seen them. I know how they are. When they sign up for an international mission, they go prepared to die if necessary. If you've never seen such human beings, it kind of is shocking to see such people whose moral courage shines through their physical beings. In Ethiopia, they provided something similar to the revolutionary government there. In Angola, where the South Africans invaded the country seeking to topple the government of the freedom movement, Fidel and the Cubans sent 40,000 troops to Angola to defend the revolution. Cuba has done more for Africa than any African nation has done for Africa. Which, by the way, makes, it's a bit deeply embarrassing, the drama of Black people back in the 70s and 80s trying to prove that Cuba's racist. There is no country that has given more to the fight against racism than the Cubans have. And in so doing have remade themselves and their nation on the way to remaking the world. Trump, the speaking from the moral sewer, has threatened Cuba. Cuba is not Venezuela. An attack upon Cuba will be seen by humanity as an attack upon it. The Cuban people are trained and socialized to fight to defend their revolution, and they will. I don't think Trump or anything that he touches wants that heat. They don't want it. All of this, you know, I'm in the Navy SEALs, I'm this, I'm that. You don't want that, dog. Because your relationship to your government is transactional. The Cubans' relationship to their revolution is moral, and they will fight like it. Every child, every woman, every man. And if there are traitors that want to betray the revolution, they will meet their fate at the hands of the Cuban people. I can assure you of that. And I'm not just talking about something I heard about. I'm talking about something I have seen. I've been there, seen it. You know, which makes even more farcical these young men walking around Philadelphia with AKs. Money, you don't know what the game is all about. You don't know what the essence of the revolutionary struggle is. We must learn from Fidel, and I mean learn in a deep sense from Fidel and the Cuban Revolution, what this is all about. The Cuban martyrs are martyrs for the freedom of humanity and should not be separated from the martyrs of the Black freedom movement, who we will talk about. Trump, representative of a collapsing civilization, threatens the future in threatening Cuba. And the last time I looked, no Cuban government official, party official, or ordinary citizen has expressed any fear of Trump coming down there. In fact, there is among the Cuban people the desire to take on Yankee imperialism in their country as an act of solidarity with Latin America, with the Venezuelans, and with humanity. No people have ever taken this stance, outgunned, but they will show in the balance of moral imperatives, morality versus evil, good versus evil, humanity versus the devil. They are anxious to wage this struggle. They're a courageous people. You could see it in their children, their courage. Their children are taught in school to honor their martyrs, their heroes. They have something to fight for, something to believe in from childhood. So I just want to say that we must honor the 32 women and men who fought and died in Venezuela. They are our heroes. And we must stand for what they stood for. By the way, I am a bit impatient with what goes for being a revolutionary in these times, and especially in this city. This performance, by the way, a very weak one at that. This claim about who they are, by the way, most of them ain't from here to start with. I become impatient with them. Their lack of morality, their lack of an attempt to discover the moral essence of the struggle. So we go forward. The free school is right, absolutely right. The moral imperative is the revolutionary imperative. The great revolutionary imaginary comes from the Black freedom movement. That's in part what we were trying to say last week in the event with with Mother Bethel. They asked the question, who is man? And therefore, who is God? And once that question is answered, the path ahead is clear. And that was always the obstacle to the revolutionary unfolding in the United States. Who is man? And who is God? What are identities that obscure man and God? And most impressively, let us take, for example, Father Divine, whose organization is now reduced to a hardcore cadre who uphold his idea that heaven could be created on earth. And as such, a new human being could be created on earth. And once a new human being is created on earth, the freedom of humanity is possible in the deepest sense. I don't know that it got across as clearly as I wanted it to, but that's what I was trying to say. That once they put that question on the table, we must see them as the vanguard of a revolutionary process in the United States. Nothing comes close to it. Now, we are witnessing a great battle, the Battle of Minneapolis, St. Paul in Minnesota. It is though we have gone from the student encampments in 100 campuses protesting the Israeli genocide in Gaza, now to the Battle of Minneapolis and the death of Renee Nicole Good. The murder of her, shooting directly at her, point blank, while she was trying to get away from the ICE Gestapo. You know, what I heard recently is that she was shot 3 or 4 times in the torso and once in the face. They unleashed on her. And then after doing it, the killer was heard calling her a fucking bitch. However, to properly understand her death, we must contextualize it in the murders of Emmett Till and Natasha McKenna. Who died on the battleground of the struggle for freedom. And again, I want to emphasize this. Emmett Till fought them. He was not afraid of them. They killed him to teach him a lesson. Let us never forget that. He died as a freedom fighter. Natasha McKenna, humiliated in the ways that she was, and we can never forget those images. It was a rape before it was a murder, and they were raping her while shouting for the camera, "Stop resisting." Miss McKenna resisted until she couldn't any longer, which therefore makes her a martyr in the struggle for freedom. But then there's Mamie Till Mobley, a revolutionary, and her act to say, "I want the world to see what they did to my son," was an act of revolutionary consciousness to say to the world, "I will show you who these people are." They died in the struggle for Black freedom. But Renee Nicole Good, whether she understood it or not, died in the struggle for Black freedom. Because now this struggle is going beyond ICE and beyond Minneapolis. This is now a struggle against white supremacy and whiteness itself. In the same way that the student protests were against the genocide in Gaza, but at the same time were against against white supremacy in its most naked form. Renee Good had probably already begun the process of rejecting whiteness as normal. And that's what it is. And what the ICE agents are saying, you get in our way, we will bring the weight of white supremacy down on you. To Black people, it is not unusual. This is embedded in our consciousness. We are not surprised, although we are horrified to see it happen. But it has happened to us so often. And even while in Minneapolis, the demonstrators, heroic demonstrators, are protesting ICE, unbeknownst perhaps to many of them, they are also in a struggle against the white supremacist social system. This is key to understand. It is not a fight against the capitalist system. It is a fight for the humanity of white people against the white supremacist social system. Once that problem is solved for white folk, the path to revolutionary transformation becomes clear for them. Without that, it's like a dog chasing its tail, demonstration after demonstration, without a resolution of the existential problem, which is ultimately the moral question. And that is the question that white folk must address. It is at the moral level. How long do I hold on to this white thing? And when and how do I reject it, as painful as that might be? The murder of Renee Good, when connected to the murders of Emmett Till and Natasha McKenna, exposed beyond a shadow of doubt the moral depravity of the Trump administration, everything he touches, but more than that, the white supremacist social system. They are beginning to understand what we understand. And what Black folk have understood for I don't know how long. And what the civil rights movement raised over and over again. The moral depravity of what they call democracy. And it is morally depraved and bankrupt. Minneapolis is one of the battles for the moral future of this nation. And in this dialectic, there are opposites. The white supremacist social system and whiteness as an identity, and the Black social system. There is no two ways about it. There is no way out of it. There is no shortcut. In this battle of civilizations, we got two here. The Black social system, in all of its manifestations, is closer to world humanity than anything else in this country. Gandhi was right when he said to Howard and Sue Bailey Thurman, "It is through your people the world will know my message." And he is right. Nanditha is absolutely correct when she says that King took Gandhi to a new level of synthesis. She is absolutely right. That Gandhi became new. He lived again through the Black freedom struggle. Isn't that ironic? But in this dialectic, Fidel and MLK, Martin Luther King Jr., become immortal in the struggle for the future. So when we hear talk about the struggle for a new revolutionary democracy, let us not be distracted. We are talking about a new humanity. Our concept of revolutionary democracy is not the writing of another constitution for the United States. It is not a matter of just governing the United States. It is a matter of changing the United States at the fundamental civilizational level, and that is at the level of morality. If Trump has made no other contribution, it has been to expose the depravity of white civilization. And we were right to draw attention to the national security document, where they talked about the erasure of European or white civilization. And they defined it in the document while not saying it. What they were saying is if people who are not white are allowed to migrate to Europe, the civilization of Europe will cease to be white and cease to exist. And therefore, are saying that European civilization is white civilization and is white supremacist. Well, what are they saying about the United States? The problem ain't migrants coming to the United States. They are a minor factor in this dialectic, believe me. Let's not overstate them. The question is Black struggle, Black civilization, which is already highly developed in its art, in its music, in its science, in its organization, in its consciousness. There is no two ways about it. So now, Donald Trump, how you gonna handle this? How are you going to deal with your erasure and the demonstration of your moral depravity in the face of Black civilization and what it has produced? If you think that there's a white way out of this, and I say it all the time, you are deeply deluded. There is no white way out of it. And I say this to immigrants and to white people. There ain't no white way out of it. If you think so, try it. You're on a sinking ship, buddy. White people are stagnant. They produce hardly anything of human value. And I always ask the question, if you're all that, where's your Martin Luther King? Where's your Muhammad Ali? When will you produce a W.E.B. Du Bois? Let's do a balance sheet. What have you done? You have produced military hardware and nuclear weapons. Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb. Martin Luther King, the father of a new nation. Where's your Duke Ellington? Where is your Sun Ra? Where is your John Coltrane? There is none. Civilizationally dead and morally depraved. You know, last week, and I know I'm talking a little bit too much. Thank you. We spent a lot of time referencing this concept: the white man is the devil. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a legitimate question. Is the white man a moral devil? Is the white man an actual mutation in the moral evolution of humanity? Is the white man physically evil, genetically evil? Well, there are many ways to approach the question. But I think the question is a legitimate one. And more white people are going to have to face it. Who are we? And why have we only produced war and destruction? Who are we? And Black people are not obligated to answer that question for them. I put it again. We are not obligated to answer the question of who you are, whether you are by nature evil. We don't have to answer that question for you. You must answer that question for yourselves and for the rest of humanity. Why is moral depravity so easy for you all? You know, and once that question is asked, then it is clear that the question of revolutionary transformation is a moral question. Martin Luther King was right. Father Divine was right. To conduct a public discourse in the ways that they did, we are indebted to them. We must honor them. We should be proud of them. And it is so beautiful that we have seen evidences of it, you know, in the group dealing with Black gods, when you all go to the mansion of Father Divine and meet some of his followers and those who are protectors of his estate and the monument where his mortal remains are, and the way they talk, the way they speak. They speak in a language that you don't hear anywhere else. And so they give us this gift. They have gifted us with this. I know several people are going to Savior's Day in Detroit, and that's very important to see it. To see it. And to see how, in spite of everything, a movement and an institution based upon an idea that man is divine could sustain itself while all around them is moral depravity and lies about them. It was so enlightening last week to see the people from Mother Bethel here, even before things started, sitting and ready to go. That discipline, that organization, that finding their way here without excuses. I couldn't find parking. I didn't know where it was at. And we have to be more than humble. Why us? Why do you see in us this? And how can we reciprocate? How can we return to you what you're giving to us? And what does this say about the moral system among people that is emerging in this city? Like Seraphim out at Father Divine's mansion asked them, well, how did y'all get in touch with that man talking about me? And that's a legitimate question. How did you, I ask Emily this all the time. Doc, I told you. Well, how did y'all get involved with this man? And I'm certain the people from Mother Bethel will know, well, how did y'all get involved with this man? And why is this man involved with all these Asians? Now, for the Nation of Islam, that's not a big question because we all Asiatic Black men and women. But from the normal construal of identities in the United States where Black and white and race and ethnicity are overarching and defining characteristics, how is it that we define what is normal? What is the ideology that says, the worldview that says that we can unite across civilizational lines? And that is new for a lot of people because most Black people expect Asians and immigrants from anywhere else to betray us and look down upon us. And you'll get a lot of African Americans that say, look, don't get involved in the anti-immigrant things because they're coming here to take your job. And once they get a foothold, they're going to look down upon you. And we've had that. We have more experience than we want to talk about of precisely that. Immigrants can get rich, many of them. Black people get poorer. You understand what I'm saying? And therefore, there is a skepticism and a mistrust. But in spite of all that, we are developing a moral ecosystem here. And it is, how do you explain the Free School Mother Bethel and the Nation of Islam? In one room, participating in the same discourse and language. And how do you explain that Christians who believe in a single God can talk about, can participate in a discussion of gods of Black people? And why are the gods of Black people and why must they be different than the gods of white people? These new kind of revolutionary democratic united fronts. this is what we see coming about. It's not because of us, but because of them. It is in the synthesis that the new is being born. I just want to end on this. I could never be prouder, and have never been proud of an elected official in Philadelphia as I am of Rochelle Bilal, the sheriff. And I want to tell you straight out of North Philly, big woman, tall woman. And she said, to ICE, don't come in here with that because you don't want this smoke. That's a modern way of saying you don't want this heat we'll bring to you. Now, contrasting young men walking around with AKs. Okay, if your identification of revolution is performance, okay. Are you performing something? I don't know what. It's like you selling wolf tickets that you can't back up. You understand what I'm saying? Rochelle Bilal, the sheriff, has a police force, and I'm certain contingents that can handle their business. Y'all can't handle no business. Let's keep it real. You know. So I guess I would end like what I want to end. You know, all of this and all of these struggles, from the 32 Cubans to the Battle of Minneapolis, to Emmett Till, Natasha McKenna, and Nicole Good, and us. We're all wrapped in a single garment of destiny. And what affects one directly affects us all indirectly. The American people and white people coming to understand this. And by the time this is over, by the time the Battle of Minneapolis is over, more white people will say this white thing is not worth it. We have to give it up. And they will ask questions that certain white people who have come close to the Nation of Islam are asking. Are we evil by definition? Have we been socialized into evilness and immorality? What by any definition is the devil? That ain't gonna continue to happen, by the way. No, that's all right. That's me. I'm talking. Okay, all right. But we ain't gonna be walking in and out. Okay, you know what I'm saying. So what?
He was just going to the back to get.
No. Okay, yeah, I don't care what he. Okay, yeah.
That's fine.
Come on and sit down.
That's fine. He will. It's fine. It's fine. It's okay.
Excuse me.
Let
me tell you something.
What do you want to say?
I'm gonna say this to you, Jake.
What's the problem?
You know, ain't no problem.
Okay, good.
There ain't no problem. I'm gonna tell you what my position is.
Okay.
Y'all ain't gonna be getting up and down.
I get it.
Coming to do anything. I don't care what it is.
Okay. We about to be.
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
See, one of the things that we're gonna do in here, when you come in here, you're gonna respect something and somebody. You understand? I demand respect.
No problem.
I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to
That's
him.
fine. You can too.
Yeah, I demand respect.
No problem.
I demand respect for this collective.
No problem.
And I'm not smiling.
Okay.
Okay? Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
No problem.
All right.
Oh.
Mhm.
That's all.
Okay. Let me end on this. We have to continue in this 250th anniversary of the American Revolution, and we're going to do it the way we do it. Fidel will be a central part of our celebration. With that, I'll end. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to, because I was listening to 2 weeks ago Free School when y'all were talking about Natasha McKenna watching the video, and Emmett Till, and I was thinking about something you had said of why is it that only Black people have to carry the pain of these murders of Black people? And
Speak up.
it's like, I was saying, like, why is it that only Black people have to carry the pain of the murders of Black people? In regards to figures like Emmett Till and Natasha McKenna and others. And it's like, if America is a so-called body politic, why is it that some parts of the population are so numb to what is inflicted upon a part of the population, a part of the people? And in that sense, I hadn't thought about it in connection to Cuba, but I had thought about it in connection to Gaza, where I do think that in a similar way, if humanity is connected, why is it that some people don't feel those murders? And
The question is, because who is man?
Yeah.
You see,
Yeah.
they're definitely, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
And it's a moral choice.
That's right.
You choose to shut yourself off from that. And yeah, I just wanted to bring it up because it's, I've been trying to just get a feel for, like, even the pace of events, the feeling of chaos in the country, everything happening like rapid succession, like Venezuela, and then now like Iran, but then also everything that's happening within the country. And sometimes I'm wondering, like, are people just numb to it? Like, are they just kind of letting it happen and then nothing's going to, they're just basically going to shut themselves off? And I think that there will be people like that, and there are people like that. But I think actually what I'm more interested in, and what I think is really happening, is it may not show itself oftentimes even in the most apparent ways, but I think that it's like, it's almost like there's a knife being put into the psyche, into the consciousness of people, multiple knives, like almost every day, basically. And I think that you're starting to see more of this, not, I don't even think it's like a short-term thing. I think it's a longer-term thing. More of this expression, first of all, a moral choice that is being made silently almost in the hearts of people to actually be human, to actually try to be human, and to actually really consciously feel like what it actually is to be a human being in society in this time, and the challenge that comes with that, the responsibility that comes with that. And I actually think that if you compare this moment with 2020 and the George Floyd protests, I actually think it's a good thing that we're not seeing the immediate, large, flashy kinds of protests that we saw back then. Because first of all, a lot of that was for the purpose of trying to get people to vote for the Democratic Party.
Absolutely.
And there was a lot of actors behind that. You saw the same actors behind the No Kings protest. And I think to me, it feels more like people are actually thinking and are actually reflecting and actually like not just trying to satisfy an immediate need for catharsis, which oftentimes protests give you. And I think it's not, and this is not against protest, but there's like this interesting article that J. Caspian Kang, who's a Korean American journalist, wrote in the New Yorker, where he was basically asking this question of why aren't we seeing the same large scale, immediate kinds of protests that we saw in the summer of 2020. And I think part of it is that people have, like, it's not that people are stupid either. It's like people went through that experience and there was no real positive change that came out of it. And so, I don't know, I think in that sense, like, I'm more optimistic about the future because of that. And I really like what you said about Fidel and how the real measure of revolutionary struggle and the quality of a revolution is the moral quality of the people. And I think I agree with you that that is what connects Martin Luther King and Fidel Castro. And there's no point in us being shy about which heroes we look up to,
Right.
and which examples we want to follow. I had more in mind, but those were my immediate thoughts.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, along the same lines, what you were talking about was like Fidel and the real essence of being a revolutionary, which is beyond just an aesthetic.
Yeah.
The real substance of being revolutionary, which is what I think we all come here, every Saturday to figure out, because we all have questions. And I've been thinking a lot about the door at the Father Divine estate and, what it all meant. And, I try to keep on track, but sometimes I've been thinking about symbols and, whether or not that is a concrete thing, but I'm still, wondering about the door outside of, I guess it's the mausoleum for Father Divine, but it to me, and then revisiting Hegel, it's really a sculpture almost, a really magnificent sculpture to the progress of human history. And sometimes I think, Doc, you mentioned the Anthropocene, the epoch of the world history where it is human-centered and humans are aware of themselves and their purpose. And to me, when you were talking about Fidel, everything, sometimes people have posters or T-shirts of Che Guevara, and a lot of time that's the performance to have the aesthetic, because we don't really know what it is to have something inside of you that really screams for freedom in the society. But we all have that drive. And what was going on with Father Divine and that beautiful estate was, a working class organization that produced that wealth, that produced that real estate, but also a leader like Father Divine that had that consciousness about world human history and where we were going, and also modernity. And I really like what Brother David, finally, what Brother David had to contribute. He really supports us, and that's why, he came. And because he also, like many other North Philadelphians I've met, understands the human struggle to know the self. And he stated it so eloquently that all these other races have fallen in love with our quest for self-discovery. And yeah, we had those classes on Hegel, and we've had discussions on Hegel, and some people have said, was that too much? Was that too passive? Can working people understand that? But the point was that we had to, and the project was incomplete, and someone had to take it up. And we're sort of, I'm beginning to see, not putting it concretely, it's really hard, we're beginning to see how the Black church and the Black cults were so close to completing that struggle. And the question is, can it be taken up today? Because, it won't be strikes. Like, there is no labor movement to put our shoulder on. So what will it look like? I don't know. I didn't do a good job of making it concrete, but at least I presented the whole problem and why we're talking about Father Divine.
Well, to build off, Samir, what you were saying is that what's stood out to me the most about Father Divine, but also the NOI and all the different groups that we've been studying, is the amount of revolutionary consciousness, beauty, art, organization that has come out of a people that have gone through and suffered so many attacks. And I think that's also, suffered so many attacks and also has faced the weight, you were saying, the weight of white supremacy. And that, I guess, your introduction was also making something clear, is how do you actually connect the Black experience in America to the general experience of anyone in this nation who stands up against white supremacy. And I think the question right now is that for those who want to be moral, want to be revolutionary, it does feel like there's a sense that the backlash will be strong. Where, similar to Black folk in this country who have suffered so many attacks, whether it's deindustrialization, whether it's criminalization, so forth, anyone who is trying to be moral and revolutionary and stand up against white supremacy will face similar attacks, because the system will not just throw in the towel easily. And I think that's is becoming more concrete through manifestations such as in Minneapolis or with the student protests. And I think that's also, I don't know if this is a simplification, but I think the confusion can either descend into more confusion or chaos, or what Jahan had described, or like you had described previously, which is the ruin of all classes, chaos in society. And I think the question is this struggle against white supremacy and the confusion that we see right now, actually the potential forming of a new consciousness, a new revolutionary consciousness among the people, which is that in facing these questions of, do I want to be white? Do I want to be moral? Can you find a way out? Which is, I think, what we've been seeing with studying Black folk, is that in the struggle against white supremacy, there was a clarity of what the path forward is, such as what we see in Father Divine or the NOI. It's not to descend into chaos, but actually a consciousness and unity among the people to struggle for the future. And yeah, because I also didn't know how to make sense of all the events that were happening with Venezuela, with Iran, with ICE. And I do think there's an acceleration of world and events in America. I think with Trump, like you were saying, or there's this acceleration that's been happening. And I think the question is that acceleration going to be a positive, or is it, or a negative, where there's continued confusion, or is it an opportunity? And I do think the opportunity is largely dependent on what we see as the revolution or the struggle to be waged, which is what we've been talking about. Is it the gun, or is it ideas, or new ideas that come out of the Black freedom movement in this country?
Yeah, I think
Can I just say, or new syntheses, new ideas and new syntheses of new ideas, but
Yeah, you were
Yeah.
saying a democratic revolutionary front.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes.
Well, I think what you were hitting on in your opening remarks, Doc, is that I feel like a lot of things free school has talked about for years, we're seeing some of it unfold now in a way that I think I've never at least felt before. And maybe I'm missing periods of time where I did feel like that, but I think I could feel this week was extremely tense. And I know that because subconsciously, one of my New Year's resolutions is to drink less alcohol because it's like bad for me. But whenever I feel tension and I'm not even conscious of it, that's when I start drinking more subconsciously. And I do think it's tense because one, the strike in Venezuela, that was obvious. But then actually, I think among the American people, especially if you look at even polling, the thing that turned people around was actually the murder of Renee Nicole Good. And to me, it's interesting because when you look at the polling says that people still support the immigration policy, that there should not be illegal immigration, et cetera, et cetera. But people overwhelmingly are against the murder of Renee Nicole Good, and it represents a certain crisis. And what that I think shows is this isn't about immigration policy, it's about what we call a deeper civilizational crisis. A crisis, and it's not just crisis of citizenship, but it's a crisis of what does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to have a civilization in this country? I wanted to start there because I do think that what we in free school had built on with Black Gods of the central question of who is man and who is God is to also, in other words, say, we've said it in other ways, like that in this stage of world history, of human history, it's no longer about the emancipation of productive forces, but about the unresolved, unanswered question of the emancipation of man. And that's the stage of modernity we're at, because I was looking at this article that talked about, do you guys know the Social Progress Index? It's like one of those, it's kind of BS, but it's one of those BS indexes about what are the happiest countries, and social talk, blah, 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 and it's always Norway at the top. And, but it was an interesting article talking about how the Social Progress Index, there was a point that was made, which is the U.S. and Latvia, for example, a country like Latvia has less than half the GDP or measure of economic progress that the US does, but they have relatively the same level of social progress index, of the satisfaction or contentment of their people. And the point is that none of this is actually about economic progress or economic stability. It's not just about economic or political stability in of itself. It's a deeper question of what really dictates the chaos or the meaninglessness or dissatisfaction of people in America. And it's what we in free school would call something civilizational. That is something more comprehensive and moral. It's a missing moral question or civilizational question more than anything. And I think that's also the way that I think the American people responded to the murder. I almost feel like, I even polled, at my work, my team is made up of former nursing home workers. They're from the rank and file, and now they're organizers. And we spent the whole team call talking about what was happening in the country. And I've never had that before, where people were combining the strike against Venezuela, the attack on Venezuela, the kidnapping of Maduro, with the murder of Renee Nicole Good. Where my coworkers are basically saying oh yeah, I want to buy an armored vest. I'm gonna, they all, some of them own guns. I think we're in a time where it is so politically fluid. There's an emerging possibility of violence in many different directions. Where the American people are, what they will do is an open question mark. And that is why the ideological struggle becomes the premier struggle. Because basically, I always, it's through Mao. It's Nandita always raises this from Mao. And you can shit on Mao all you want, but that man is, honestly, he's a political genius in some ways. So he phrases some things where he said, if there's a field of flowers, how do you show the American people, the broad American people becoming, that there is a very beautiful flower, a positive human future that is also organic to them, organic to their revolutionary history, that this is the flower to pick, and not all the other distractions, not all the synthetic manufactured flowers the deep state will plant for you to pick. How do you show the American people that this is the flower to pick among all the different flowers in the field? And I think that is the role of the ideological struggle. It has never been more premier in this moment, but now. And I think that's also where Cuba comes in, because I think you have to see Fidel not as someone who showed that socialism or communism worked, but rather that Fidel showed that the struggle is the struggle of ideas, of moral ideas. Not of remaking the political system in of itself, but remaking the people, the human beings, how to conquer the color line in order to destroy even values of greed, values of white supremacy, values of materialism, values of advertising. How do you destroy all the things that deteriorates or diminishes human life? And that's why, I mean, Fidel is not just someone for the Cuban people. Fidel is the man of humanity. I mean, it's why, like, so many people across the world, whether you go to India or wherever, people will name their children Fidel. Like, why would you have an Indian man named Fidel Gupta or whatever? Like Fidel Ramakrishna. Like, that makes no sense. And it's because Fidel is that universal man who shows what the new human being should be like. And I just want to touch upon what both Jeremiah and Doc talked about with Emmett Till and Natasha McKenna, because I completely agree. You cannot, I'll just say it, which is, to a certain extent, you do have to raise the question of, there is a reason why so many white people, but also broadly the American people, are so distraught over Renee Nicole Good, because they never thought that a white woman, a normal white woman, would be so brutally shot and killed like that, which is what Black people are not surprised by in this country. No one is surprised that ICE would act like that. No one is surprised except the people who are surprised now. And it's because there's a crisis. I think it raises a crisis of whiteness. I do think we're seeing a lot of different people question, who am I? What are we put here for? What unites us together? Where are we going? What has to be done? Because I was telling Alice this morning, I was like, in some ways when you look at the murder, like I thought like I even looked at the New York Times multi-camera analysis. It's actually very horrifying, because the way white men use that gun, it's equivalent to rape. It's not where it comes from psychosexually. It's not that different. And it's why, for example, what you were talking about, Emmett Till and Natasha McKenna, that why it's so important to see that they fought for their lives. They knew what they were looking at. They knew the system and the evil and the types of people who they were confronting before they were killed. And I think a lot of people are seeing that video of Renee Nicole Good, and even the kidnapping of Maduro. I think the American people, to a certain extent, are seeing themselves in that. It opens questions of existence and identity that all these killings of Black folk did not necessarily bring to them, but now they're facing that question. Oh, Maduro was kidnapped. How is that possible? How could that happen? Maduro in his pajama tracksuit, typically he also it's not like he looks Black, he looks like somewhat European, but he's that working class Venezuelan guy. People are seeing themselves in all of in Maduro and Renee Nicole Good, the protesters being shot in Minneapolis. And I just wanted to raise that level of the psychosexual, because I think Baldwin was right. I was telling Alice this morning too, I definitely think when you look at ICE more than even police departments, ICE, you know exactly who they are. There was a huge recruitment drive, I think in the summer of last year, because I was getting the ads. I don't know why they would want me to join ICE. I was getting the ads. I don't know how many of you guys got the ads on Twitter, but I was definitely getting them. They wanted me in there. And the people who probably joined are, one, former military veterans, not the veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan war who are against the war now because they were so horrified by what they had to do. They're not that group of veterans. They're the group of military folk who enjoyed killing. They were trained and enjoyed killing. That deep white supremacy that manifests like that. And they bring it home against their own people now. And I definitely think is what Du Bois calls the ignorant, the very ignorant class of people, debased people, evil people, who I definitely think the reason why they wanted to kill Renee Nicole Good was because they expected a white woman to get down on her knees and blow him.
Yeah.
And she was like, and instead she said, fuck you.
Yeah.
And so in response, that's why that ICE officer said, fine, let me fuck you back with that gun.
Yeah.
I do think there's a psychosexual level of it, and it has to do exactly with what Baldwin called the interrelation between white supremacy and manhood. You know, like we talked about freaks in the American ideal of manhood. It has to do with that psychosexual dimension of they also probably didn't like that she chose to be with a woman. Like that she did not want to get down on her knees for him, but that she was like, no, I am not like you. I want you to get out. And I think it raises the political question of the state. I do think it raises the question of, in this time, when you have people like Renee Nicole Good and all these white people who say, we're not like you. We want you out of Minneapolis. We want you out of this society. What happens when ICE or the people who are within that nexus are actually part of the state? What then?
Yeah.
Because I think the difference is that the Black freedom struggle, Black folk have raised the dimension of the political struggle, the question of how do we transform modernity? How do we transform society? And hence, how do the people have to be transformed? And I still think white people need to reach that place of self-consciousness, that level of political self-consciousness of, yes, ICE, it's not just ICE. There's something civilizational and about the state. It has to be put on that level of the struggle. And yes, I just want to raise that because I do think Emmett Till, Natasha McKenna, and now with Renee Nicole Good, I do think we're seeing something here. And I just want to repeat that I think these are very tense times. I have not felt like this. And it's not just because I'm feeling more sensitive or fragile right now. I do think I think we live in very dangerous times. I think the deep state still exists. I think the deep state will use many different groups that come out of nowhere. It's true, like many different types of groups, synthetic algorithms. They will use they will use algorithms, they will use technology, they will use weapons, and they will try to use these groups to distract the American people from a united struggle for a new civilization, and to make it seem like the battlefield is a battlefield that is not the real battle. And I think that's why we have to be like, I do think that's why we have to be extremely ideologically clear.
I wanted to, because what Emily was bringing up about the psychosexual dimension reminded me of something from your lecture last week that really stood out to me when you asked the question of, like, we really have to ask and understand the question of why it is that white people seem to have this unprovoked hatred. And now, I mean, to add, and I completely agree with what you're saying, this almost like, psychosexual depravity. Why does this happen? Like, what in their psyche predisposes them to act like this towards people who have literally done nothing? Like Renee Good, okay, I mean, she's even a white woman. She's definitely not who you're trying to catch as, an ICE agent or whatever. So what is this? And I mean, I like a lot of what you said in your introductory remarks today, and especially the question, especially what you said about Black people are not obligated to answer these questions for white people. And because there was a Black freedom struggle, which was raising these questions, not just for the Black world, but also for the white world, to remake America on moral terms, on civilizational terms. And even this idea of, and I've been thinking about this a lot these last 2 weeks also, the white man as the devil. I mean, when Elijah Muhammad says that, it serves that purpose of reminding Black people who they are, like Samir was saying, self-discovery, and to basically flip the lies of the white narrative of, Black people, you're inhuman, white supremacy and this and that. But increasingly, while that acceptance already exists among Black people and darker humanity in general, and now is the question of whether white people will be able to recognize it in this time and place. And yeah, really the question, the way you were putting it is, are we just like, does accepting whiteness really socialize to become evil, like civilizationally, corrupted or, distorted in some way?
Depraved.
And I think you see whether or not those are the lines along which these conversations are going on. That's what you see playing out in these like videos you see of people confronting ICE agents and so on, because eventually this has to be like, eventually I guess this will also have to be detached from Trump himself in some way, because I agree with what you said, is that if he has made any contribution, he has basically like removed the veil of civility from all of this and exposed that this was always there and this was always part of white civilization. And there's no separation between any white person and this anymore, any American for that matter, and this anymore. But that's what I was reminded of.
I was thinking of the like Baldwin's essay, Nothing Personal, where he's talking about, he basically describes like the dark 4 a.m. hour where you have to come face to face with like the essential questions of life. And there's a part in it where I think he's asking how Americans respond to the assassination of Kennedy, and saying that people want to believe that the evil came from without, that it's not connected with the moral climate of America. You want to believe that the enemy sent the assassin from far away, and that we ourselves could never have nourished as monstrous a personality or be in any way whatever responsible for such a cowardly and bloody act. And then he says, well, the America of my experience has worshipped and nourished violence for as long as I have been on earth. The violence was being perpetrated mainly against Black men, though, the strangers, and so it didn't count. And then he says, but if a society permits one portion of its citizenry to be menaced or destroyed, then very soon no one in that society is safe. The forces thus released in the people can never be held in check, but run their devouring course, destroying the very foundations which it was imagined they would save. And he says, but we're unbelievably ignorant concerning what goes on in our country, to say nothing of what goes on in the rest of the world, and appear to have become too timid to question what we are told. And he says, our failure to trust one another deeply enough to be able to talk to one another has become so great that people with these questions in their hearts don't speak them. Our opulence is so pervasive that people who are afraid to lose whatever they think they have persuade themselves of the truth of a lie and help disseminate it. And God help the innocent here, that man or woman who simply wants to love and be loved. And he says, that basically, if this continues, then the people are doomed. But I think when he says that if a society permits one portion of its citizenry to be menaced, nobody in that society is safe. I feel like he's saying that the Black man actually is the representative of the entire civilization. And I think I return to this essay, I feel like, whenever it feels like times in the country are becoming existential. And I feel like the genocide in Gaza and the student encampments was the last time that it felt, I think, to this degree. And I think that existential moment has to come for the American people, because there's a void in the society that has not been filled, and it can't be filled until that ignorance is actually revealed. But I think that it's very powerful that at a time like this you're confronted with the actual basic questions. What is the meaning of life? What is the meaning of death? Who is man? Who is God? What is any of this for? But I also think that means that it's a very sensitive and vulnerable time, when the answers you provide to those questions determine everything that comes after. And I think that if there is this void, I think people want to answer it in many ways. People want to be hasty to say, oh, the meaning of life is this. And I think that's what also, Emily, like when you say there are distractions, there are many alternatives that are placed. And I think even this thing of like giving your life for a cause, but what does giving your life for a cause actually mean? And I was also really moved by how you were describing Fidel, because I was reading a lot of his speeches from the 1970s to like 1980. And it's the way that he talks about the Cuban Revolution as a decades-long struggle, something that is not just about him, but lives in every single human being. And even the way that they describe like going to Africa, but it wasn't just Angola. It was Ethiopia, it was Algeria, it was Syria, it was everywhere. And he said that basically for every soldier or every person or every technician that is selected to actually go, there are like 100 applicants who want to go and are not chosen. And he was also saying that it's not just about the soldiers, it's not just about the military. He says for every soldier there are 20 times as many teachers and professors that are graduated. And then I think, he says, when it comes right down to it, we are all soldiers of the revolution, but it is more difficult to know how to teach than how to die. More than once our men fought and died for this right. For men must also know how to die so that humankind may live. And then like this thing of like the internationalism, because he even describes like the root of Cuba as an Afro-Latin country. And he says like, this is why like nobody in Africa is afraid of us. Like we belong with you. And he says, we're advancing resolutely toward becoming a country with a high level of culture. We will live on what our technology, natural resources, and sweat can create. And we won't be egoists, like a snail closed in its own shell. We will give the world everything within the reach of a revolutionary and internationalist generosity. And this is why I think Fidel is basically like Martin Luther King, where he is a socialist, he is a communist, he is a Marxist-Leninist. But I think more than that, it's his love for the people and this optimism for the future, and the way he even describes himself as basically being a dreamer, where he says, what is our life without you? What is Cuba without the rest of the world? If our dreams of yesterday have become today's realities, our dreams of today will come true tomorrow. And this will be true for the whole world if we can dream together of a better future. And that just feels so much like in this thing of a single garment of destiny. But yeah, I just think that even when we think about Fidel and King, I don't think it's just that, oh, these are two contemporaries who lived and were leaders of the Americas in the mid 20th century. But I think it's this question of where they come from. And it is this root of basically Black humanity being the root of all of it. And yeah, also, I think last week we had also talked a little bit about the James Lawson speech that Jeremiah had shared. But this thing of Black folk as a bridge to colored modernity, to world civilization. And I think part of it is that if white people are wandering in the wilderness, if there's a moment of reckoning where you have to look in the mirror and say this is empty, what is it all for? Where do I go? I think the point is that you don't have to start from scratch. There's no need to continue wandering for another 2 decades trying to invent a new identity. There is something there. And I think even the way that Baldwin wrote this essay to say I know there comes a time when you ask yourself, can I start over? Can I basically become human again? And he's saying that the Black man has been here this whole time. And maybe it's time to finally, see yourself and go there.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I also feel it's a very tense week. And I feel there's a lot of, part of the sensitivity is that it's a time of great possibility and opportunity, but so much could also go wrong. And I think thinking about people like Fidel and King, gives me a lot of strength to know that it's them, but it's not just them. It's all the people who made their movement possible. And I think especially what you're saying about the Cuban people and how they've been trained to defend their revolution, that is an asset to us too, to know that we can be trained to defend the ideas and to fight for a revolution in this country.
I just wanted to add regarding that speech that Lawson gave in 2010, which was at the 50th anniversary of SNCC. And one, it's very sobering because as much as also we in Free School lift up the Third American Revolution, the Civil Rights Movement, as the exemplary revolutionary struggle of American history, in the same way that Lawson, he says that, he's there has been no movement with that comprehensive energy, involvement of the people in revolutionary struggle. There has been no parallel in American history. And yet it's very sobering because he says, and yet to recognize that is to say that we must have in the 21st century a movement that makes the civil rights movement pale in comparison. And I think that's a very daunting task. It's a revolutionary task, but it's one that I think I'm like, oh, is that possible? Is it possible to have a movement that makes the movement of, he says, the 2 decades from 1953 to like 1973, like that critical period in American history in which so many people gave of themselves to a struggle for not just for this country's future, but for the world's future. Lawson is saying what we need in the 21st century is something that makes that movement pale in comparison, almost like just a memory. And then he also talks about nonviolence in that context, where he says, when I'm talking about nonviolence in this time, for this century, for this struggle, for this phase of the American people's history, he's like, first of all, I'm not talking about pacifism. I'm not talking about even protests primarily. I'm not talking about even agitation primarily. What he's really saying is like, we need what you said, a moral remaking of the people into a new civilization. Those are exactly the stakes of what he even calls nonviolence in the 21st century. And that's where he draws the connection between that critical encounter, that world-defining encounter between Gandhi and the Thurmans as evidence of that, where when he is re-going over that encounter, and Gandhi saying that it will be through the Afro-American people that my message will really reach the world. Lawson takes that and says, as Nuri said, Black people are the bridge between white civilization, and he says, white civilization and world humanity, and towards a new heaven and a new earth. And I think in that sense, like, it is very clarifying, it's very reaffirming of us when we look at this 250th anniversary of the United States of 1776 and everything that comes with it. In many ways, like this is something we were talking about on Sunday, but in many ways you can look at each of the past 3 American revolutions as ultimately boiling down to a battle between two different forces of history, or between, let's say, during the first American Revolution. Ultimately, this is what Ken Burns says, it's not just about the American versus British, it was a civil war between what became these new quote-unquote patriots and the loyalists to the British. And obviously the Civil War of the 1800s was itself a civil war. And you can even look at the civil rights movement as a kind of, it boils down to a revolution clarifies that the people have a choice in terms of where they stand in history. And for us, what we propose to the American people is it boils down to a choice between white civilization and Black civilization.
Yep.
And that's actually a choice that people can make. And I think that I really resonate with the way that, even when we talk about, the white man is the devil, that framework, I think part of me is I'm the most drawn to the way that Baldwin says it, where Baldwin is like, look at what white people have made of themselves. You've made yourself into this. No one has forced you to do it. You've made that choice to turn yourself into a moral monster. And that means still that you have the choice to reject that and to become an actual human being. And I think that, like, in that sense, part of what is so, not just disturbing to me, but what I find so, like, when I get really anxious about America and I get very impatient with people in this country is, especially on this question of empire, what really disgusts me at a deep moral level is the part of the consequence and condition of living in the country, which is the imperial power in the world, is the abdication of responsibility. Yeah. It's the abdication of morality, where your government just does all these things, and then you just be like, okay, well, like, maybe it's justified, maybe it's not. I don't have a choice. Like, I don't, like, it's not my problem. And maybe it was justified, Like, that's how a lot of people who I think, especially those who are, I think, more bought into just kind of following Trump for this, like, just for the sake of following Trump, like, and you can see that on other sides of, like, the political spectrum. But what I really detest, that way of thinking and that way of being a person where it's just like all the decisions are made for you and you've abdicated any sense of responsibility as a person and who is part of what is supposed to be a quote unquote a democracy. And that in that sense, it is also basically, especially for men, it's an application of manhood in the same way that it's an application of womanhood. It's an application of being a human being. And I think part of what I've also been trying to, I guess, kind of gauge the trajectory of over the past couple of years has been, in many ways, there was a process that I think started with the Israeli genocide in Gaza that has moved closer to home, which is Israel, especially, is that mirror to the rest of the Western world of this is whiteness. This is whiteness, as you said, at its most depraved. And you can see it in the way that Emily brought up. It's like, what do the Israeli soldiers do against Palestinians? It's not just killing, they're raping them, and they make a spectacle out of it. They gloat about it, they joke about it, and their television programs celebrate it and joke about it. And that, I think, in many ways was the mirror for white people, for all people in this country who are like, oh God, like, is that what whiteness is? Is that what white supremacy is? And in that way, that force has moved, I think, closer to home. And it's, I think, most concretely symbolized through ICE and through the behavior of those men and, I guess, women who are attracted to that. But it's not just that. And so I think it's in that way, like, you know, when we did the year of Baldwin and we talked about all these ideas that emerged from Baldwin and from the movement that he was a part of, one of those ideas is his concept of the mirror. And this mirror of, like, what the Black man reflects back to you, but also what you want to see and how you're imprisoned by this mirror. And I think that there's a way of talking about Baldwin where it's just like literary analysis or just people who are sophisticated cultural people just like talking about something for the sake of talking about it. And then there's a way of talking about Baldwin which brings him into reality, which actually makes him a force which is present in the lives of people and present also in literally the making of this period of history that we're part of. And I think that, like, just one other example of it is, like, when you look at Trump in particular, part of what I think the Trump administration does, it's not just Trump, but also, like, really people like Stephen Miller, who I think is probably the most similar to, like, a miniature Netanyahu in this country, is, like, they do this thing where it's not just the expression of violence, but they do this thing, especially on social media. They like to have trophies. They make trophies out of people like Renee Nicole Good, but they also make trophies out of the Black and brown men who they imprison and who they hold up as like, oh, look at this criminal or look at this whatever. Without any, first of all, without any due process, but also it's like, it's for the spectacle and it's for the gratuitous white supremacist thing of like, we are powerful, and look, we force into submission these Black and brown men. And it nurtures that really vicious, and like what Emily said, it's a very, like psychosexual, like sense of gratuity, and this feeling of like, oh, I'm in power. And Trump has really leaned into that over the past couple of months. And I just want to like lay that out as like one of the examples. They did that with Maduro too. The first thing that Trump did was to be like, look at this trophy of this brown man who we've captured and we're going to put on display, you know? And like, you know, whatever's happening in Venezuela behind the scenes, I think there's still more that we want to understand. But like, I think that there's something about that, which I think is very important in terms of being able to even identify where that comes from. And it's not just to even distance yourself from it, but it's a question for white people, especially, but for all Americans to be like, do I see myself in that? And that is a moral choice that people make. And the last thing I want to say is that I think going back to like the figures of like Emmett Till and Natasha McKenna and all the martyrs that we've talked about, I do think that one of the criteria for civilization, any civilization, are its martyrs. And those whom it holds up as essentially immortal. And those whom it holds up as its, like we've said, the representatives of its civilization. And I think it's very important, I know that we talked about, I think it's very important that the Black freedom movement, the civil rights movement began with the martyrdom, in many ways, the martyrdom of Emmett Till.
Yes, it did.
That was the crucial, I mean, like, Reverend, like, you've talked about this too. What it was like to be a young man, to see what happened to Emmett Till.
Yeah.
And that becomes the galvanizing point. But it's like also, that becomes the point at which people realize, okay, we are struggling for something which is much more than even political rights. We are struggling for a new type of human being. We're struggling for a new civilization. And I think that Lawson in particular articulates that, especially for this century and for the challenge that we're confronted with.
Okay, I want to read Megna's comments. Okay, because it's related to what we were just talking about. But Megna said, I think it's valuable that we frame these events not as pro or anti-Trump, but pro or anti-white. I also deeply appreciate the time spent discussing the Cuban and the Black martyrs. They are just numbers in the news, but our revolutionary education teaches us they are heroes we should strive to emulate. And yeah, I think this point about the martyrs, because if you think about it, a martyr is basically one who answers the question, who is man and who is God? Like a man, like a human being who then ascends to something that is sacred. And yeah, I think what you're saying about them being like basically the cornerstone or the foundation for a civilization. And yeah, like it's a question of, what do you worship? Do you worship power? Do you worship brutality? Or do you worship the martyr? Like the one who has sacrificed their lives. Yeah, that was
I think that's very important in this understanding of man as divinity, as divine, or as Father Divine and Seraphim becoming angels, transcending man as he is to becoming man as he must be. Yeah.
I wanted to say that I think Baldwin has gone farther than anyone in trying to reveal white psyche to the white man, as he said, revealing the beloved to himself. And something that Emily said made me remember that he always said that the white person not being able to, like, he's always struggled with his identity. Baldwin believed that there were no white people in America, and it was a manufactured identity, an identity that you take upon yourself. And one of the greatest things that solidifies this identity is that you sort of define the bottom, and that bottom was the Black man. And I think something that Emily said made me realize that what happens when you find yourself at the bottom. As a white person, you find yourself at the bottom. When you really have this existential crisis of identity. And I think that is what happens when you witness the murder of somebody like Renee Nicole Good, where law enforcement officers, they are technically law enforcement officers, right? Shoot you in cold blood. You are always supposed to believe, a la Plessy v. Ferguson, that the law is supposed to be on the side of the white man. That it can never be against you. But what happens when it is against you? It makes you confront a sort of severe moral crisis. And I think that that is what a lot of America is going through right now. And if we can just go back to when we were talking about even the election of Trump, we thought that Trump was advocating a platform of peace, non-intervention, and he reneged on all of that. But it is relevant that is what the American people wanted. That is what the American people had thought that they were getting. And so I still have faith, in some ways, that this mask of whiteness is crumbling, and Trump is sort of in the center of doing that. And when you think about all these Black Gods organizations, I can talk about, the one that Eddie Michel, Jahan, and I have been trying to work with the Nation of Islam. They believe that, the only way that the white man can stop being a devil is by accepting Islam. They believe that nobody is out of the realm of salvation. The people in the Nation of Islam have gone forward, much more forward in that path, but it doesn't mean that anybody else is sort of excluded from that path, And I wanted to say one other thing, which is 2 weeks ago when we were talking about Natasha McKenna and we saw that video, we brought up Emmett Till and his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, and we called her a representative of civilization. And I don't think I got it. At that point, I don't think I got it entirely what that was really supposed to mean. But I think last night, I went home and I watched a lot of videos of Mamie Till Mobley and the funeral, of the things that she said and the fierceness with which she sort of said that this was my decision to have this open casket. And that made me think about a lot of things, and I sort of wrote down kind of if somebody asked me, why do you think that this woman is a representative of civilization, what would I say? And it made me go back to our roots, like our Du Boisian tradition that understands civilization not as this European monolith of high culture, but the struggle for what we've talked about for freedom and beauty and truth.
Yeah.
And this struggle that is oftentimes, carried most profoundly by those who are denied the status of civilization in this country, which is the Black proletariat. And it was, and when I was looking at Mamie Till Mobley talking, it was like she was transforming this site of barbarism into a theater of moral reckoning, like a kind of theater of moral civilizational reckoning. And the civilization of white supremacy, with its sanctioned violence, with its law, and as Baldwin said, the logic of erasure, the invisibilization of these communities and what they go through, where deaths are hidden and mourning is silenced. I think she combated that by taking this agonizing, conscious decision to hold an open casket. I think for me, that was a radical civilizational act, because she forced America and the world to look at the physical evidence of this violence. And in a way, I think that it is something that Du Bois says is the propaganda of the dead. Sorry, the propaganda of the deed, sorry. And where the past and history, it comes up in various ways to make you realize something of the present moment. And this was, I feel like it wasn't a plea to be included into a stagnating civilization, where even Baldwin talks about, do we want to be integrated into a burning house? And there's a lot of debate about that. But I think that a way to think about it is that we don't want to be integrated into a stagnating civilization, but this is it's a judgment upon it. It's a judgment upon it, and you demand a transformation of it if you want to see something new come out of all of this. And the second thing I was thinking about is how Du Bois's concept of double consciousness, where the sense of looking at oneself through the eyes of another, and I think in this concept of double consciousness, he also explains something called second sight, where you see more than what the world around you sees. And I think that Emmett Till Mobley had a lot of that. She had second sight. She could see almost into the future of what this would represent. She was what was expected of her was a private mourning, a private funeral, whereby the veil would be conserved. But by refusing to do that, she enforced a kind of epistemological break. I'm using your words, but this is what came to me. She enforced a epistemological break, forcing white people to look at themselves. She was not alone. She was not a solitary figure of pity, but she was a critical intellectual at that time. The Montgomery bus boycotts, as Jeremiah was saying, happened just a few months after that. While the white civilization tried to build this narrative where Emmett Till's life was a caricature or a threat or just invisible, his mother insisted on a revolutionary counter narrative and made the world see him as her child, a subject worthy of love, a vessel of unrealized potential, And this narrative is fundamental of cultural creation, which forms the kind of basis of any kind of civilization. And through
a cultural set up on the time. This.
What did I say? This narrative forms a kind of cultural creation that forms the sort of foundation of civilization. And in doing that, I feel like she was mobilizing mass consciousness and seeding moral outrage, which is the only kind of outrage I feel like is justifiable. And I feel like Emmett Till Mobley represented civilization not as a passive inheritor, but as a mother and an active participant. And the civilization that she represents was not one of abstract philosophies and the marble halls of Europe, but of, open caskets and shared grief and love that, transformed the agony that this mother was feeling into the fuel for a movement that we saw. And, what Jeremiah said about this moment, like what Lawson was talking about, that this moment has to have more of that fuel than the civil rights movement did. It's a daunting challenge, but it has to be done, and it has to be done with keeping figures like this alive in our hearts.
Right now, I definitely feel in the air that there's a unacceptance of just the status quo and searching for something different, because what currently exists is increasingly unbearable. And when looking for like that something new, as is, I don't think people have the tools to move forward. The only thing that looks like prominent in my mind, rightfully so, would be like the rise of China, which is something, when you look at the reorganization of the state, the economy, both domestically and the world, it's like, yeah, I'm down with that. I'm looking at that too. That's something I aspire to. And I would say that you can know a tree from the fruit that it bears. And that's a good fruit. But what truly I think speaks to what is needed right now is something like the revolutionary process of Cuba. If you look a little farther, or even honestly, you just have to look at yourself. It would be the United States, where Fidel, like King, looked at the object of the revolutionary struggle as the human being. The human being, him and herself, that transformation of that person being the goal and the object of your revolutionary struggle. I do think it's heroic that these Cubans laid down their lives for Venezuela, where they had been transformed in mind and heart so much. Where you say, "Oh, Bolivarian revolution." I'm a person that believes in these ideas to the fullest, and I'll give myself to it so much so that I'll lay down my life for it, because in my words, I would say that they do believe in a single garment of destiny. What happens to one of us happens to all of us. And that process and transformation of the human being, and that human being that is producing that process in a society that produces that human being, is something that I feel the American people must know and understand. Like if we were to have a path forward, and for us to fully have that path forward, I think that necessitates knowing and understanding that revolution and that human being, that process that produced a human being that is Black America, in the people that are even alive today, like our brother Gregory. I know you guys are engaging with Father Divine's church, someone like Seraphim. I believe that it is necessary and part of our revolutionary process to be able to first be able to look at ourselves and understand ourselves as a people, to be able to understand people like Brother Gregory and Seraphim, to have a understanding of what you need society to be reorganized as such, and the kind of human beings that we could be instead of what currently is shocking and difficult to look at with like this ICE shooting. And so there's this outward looking, but I think there's an inward looking with the tools.
Can I say that when I entered free school today, I learned that our topic would connect the martyrdom of Emmett Till and Natasha McKenna with the killing of Renee Nicole Good. I think it was a bit of an unusual connection for me, just because I've had such a difficult time understanding all this turmoil and all that. It's really tragic and really, really brutal, but what it represented, the tensions that's been unleashed, on the streets of these American cities around the question of ICE. It was a lot for me to just take in, and then also in the week of the following, what we've been talking about in terms of the invasion and kidnapping of Venezuela and its president, and then also even everything going on with Iran too. But I think as we've talked more, I think what's really been a turnkey moment for me is how we have been talking about martyrdom, not just as tragedy, but also in terms of like in civilizational terms, and in the question that we've started to really hone in on, and that I think has been really illuminating, putting the question of who is man and who is God, and like how does that get answered, and how does that not get answered in honest ways, or how does that get obstructed? All of those things have started to fall more and more into place. And I mean, it's also, I think that was a breakthrough for me, because I mean, I do feel like there's, I can say again that also it has been a very tense week, and it's a very heady time as we're trying to make sense of how is it that not only we as Free School, but also the American people move forward. And I can't help but feel that, you know, my breath has been held this whole week, because there was parts of me that really played back in my mind the 2020 protests with George Floyd, and I thought that, you know, since these last 6 years, the university hasn't stopped working to like add and fuel a lot of, you know, confusion, distractions, and ideas into the American people, or even like the ways in which, like all of this chaos is being intentionally dialed up to like, you know, the highest degree. And my greatest fear was actually finally crystallized when I was like, oh, like actually so many people, there are quite a few people that are embracing this new Black Panther Party, even posting on like Facebook groups, like, how can I support them? And it's like, is it not that obvious that do we need more huge guns in the streets of Philadelphia? Do we need these kinds of like, of course, if it look a bit cathartic for certain people want to see a certain, like, oh, they feel like there's such a void, so they want to see like legacies like the Black Panther Party revived. But like this way, this kind of like standing off and like this provocation when there's so much tension, really. And it made me actually, like have to double down on myself, like why it is that Free School and our study and our dedication and our commitment to a nonviolent path, an ideological path of resistance, but also, forward, like path seeking is really actually like so necessary to actually assert that it is something like the civil rights movement, but even leaps and like developments in consciousness so exemplified by the actual nature of the Black freedom struggle is so much of the shape that resistance, or even a way forward must look like. Because I think like violence is so in the air, and I think so many people want to do something and want to give their lives, but like, I mean, I didn't realize actually when, sorry to bring in something that I know we had talked about last summer, but I didn't watch one battle after another, but last night I like just happened to be like, what was that movie about? And then I watched it and I was like, wow, like people really associate certain people associate the word revolutionary with armed struggle, these kind of guerrilla uprisings. They even associate something like, and the heart of that movie also was quite a bit about like, how do you free detained migrants from detention centers? How do you like defend the like defenseless like children and families in like these small Californian towns? Like I was like, wait, was this movie about now? Yeah. But essentially, I had to think about it and stop for a moment. It's like, no, I think how we've also approached the question of these ICE protests, not also necessarily like putting immigration in the place of this in this equation, but actually looking at it as a battle against whiteness. That's going to be really important to clarify, because I'm not sure everyone's quite prepared to go there, but that needs to be brought up. And maybe people innately feel that when they see Trump, maybe they see like, as we've been elucidating, like what ICE represents, not what I want to become, not me, or not what I want my children to become, but what then? And like, that is something I think I mean, I'm just holding my breath because I fear that, you know, this like the immigration question has been something that the Democratic Party has used so intensely to muddy the waters and to drum up like an anti-Trump approach that I think
being able to step back and ask those, not just those ideological questions, but also the moral questions of like, who am I? Like, what is my role in this country? What responsibility do I have to play in it? Like, those are things that I think, it's so important to not lose that off, the table of discussion, because it could very easily, I think, descend into getting so diverted and getting, so used for like insurrections or for, more tragedies and more deaths, more killings and more violence without it actually being like that kind of standard being held. And so this is just how I'm feeling, or I have been cautious of, but I think this is, been really illuminating because of the way I think we've also injected that spirit, not just also, to also connect it to like even the alternative or even the moral example of Fidel and the Cuban Revolution, and even starting there and like, putting on the table the question of what is the criteria for a revolution. And I really liked Doc when you said that Cuba is a moral project and that Cuban people's relationships to one another, their government, their country is a moral one, not a transactional one. It was really, really big for me because it really dispels all these myths that people have about like human capacity even. And like, is human nature always to be transactional? To like, even whiteness wants you to believe that it is, people will always seek a certain kind of self-interest in gain and self-gain and self-preservation or selfishness, or even sacrifice even very like human things on the altar of whiteness and for profit and for all the wrong reasons. And so I feel like that's something that I find to be actually really important to remind ourselves, like, again, like, now is the time to actually question what is human nature, or to even reassert a certain kind of sky, because it's really easy to get very cynical in a time like this and want to abandon hope, abandon responsibility, or like the one response to seeing all of this is almost to throw up your hands and be like, if this is the America that I've been born in and see, I don't want to be a part of it. Let me leave. And it's like,
ain't no place to go.
No, exactly. I was like, wait, but where can you find somewhere else? And also, if you abandon America, like, you're abandoning so much more. And you're not the only one to feel this, or you're not the first one to feel this way. Like, I just had a conversation with a friend of mine, and it just entered this very sad and gridlocked place where I kept saying, like, no, I understand your desire to now, of all times, and you've always talked about wanting to leave and travel the world and distance yourself from whiteness, distance yourself from America. But, I can't choose, many people can't choose that, but it also reminds me that the choice that we actually have to stay and to fight is not just to, endure like years, like, hardship, or just like put ourselves, give ourselves to a hopeless project. There is a reason why, like, King used the language or the framework of injecting a new spirit of civilization into the veins of America, or even like we've come to like cash a check, like at the speech in Washington that, was set forth by, the Declaration of Independence. I'm kind of mashing a few things here, but my sense is like that framework is still like the reason why we return to, there's a reason why I think we are interested not in like a new constitution, but to say that there is something fundamental about America that can be transformed, that can be actually all the things that, people are trying to seek and find sometimes by looking towards like leaving America. Well, maybe you can try to find that here by actually struggling for a new country. But I said all that to say, to also circle back to something that I just wanted to bring here, which is I came across, from my time in Cuba, I happened to know one of a journalist who has been making a lot of videos about Cuba this time, and then she actually sat down with the best friend of one of the young men, who was one of the 32 young men, and I shared it on Facebook, so I'm expecting that maybe some people here have seen it, but one of the 32 young men and women that was killed in Venezuela defending Maduro, and actually
sent there on an international mission, you know, from your recollection, Doc, like, it was that this young man whose name was Junior was a cryptographer. Like, he was basically in information science. He worked for the Cuban government. His role was not necessarily armed combat, but actually to ensure that messages could be sent, you know, with a degree of national security and privacy from, you know, from the state from the Cuban state or the Venezuelan state to one another. You know, all those things that, I mean, are getting raised now with the nature of, like, why were there inside informants and collaborators with the CIA among, like, the Venezuelan government or even the Iranian government when we were talking about the 12-day war, like, last summer. Like, these are all things that it sounds like, you know, are on the table, but at the same time, what was really, really moving was that this friend, like, he was 30 years old. He's from the eastern part of the island, which is it's very rural. You can imagine that if he's 30 years old, he was born in the 1990s during the special period after the collapse of the Soviet Union. He's dark-skinned, of Black, you know, African descent, which probably meant that his mother or grandmother was probably the first in their family to actually learn how to read under the Cuban literacy program. And maybe if you go back a few generations, they were slaves. They worked on sugar or coffee plantations, and then after slavery was abolished and Cuba gained independence from Spain, that's still, like, so much in the DNA and, like, the kind of structure of so much of the island. Sugar plantations, coffee plantations. It is so much that, but at the same time, it really wasn't until the Cuban Revolution that a young man like Junior could be born and actually say, like, I want to raise my family, my ailing mother, out of the small house in the mountains that you can only reach by horseback on the rainiest of days. I want to do that by serving my country and serving, and I will shed my blood easily for Venezuela, but any international mission. I'm gonna combine my talents in, like, computer science, electronic, but also my patriotism, my sense of duty into a way that even, like, it, like, in the 21st century still has an incredible place to play in the world and also my country. And he shared so much of this with his friend who was clearly so much grieving and so shocked and so in pain that, like, someone so beautiful could be killed like that. And also someone who wasn't trained for, like, combat but knew the risks of going so far and losing your life. And there was always going to be risk, but it was always something that didn't seem like it had he had an ounce of hesitation. But my sense is that like, the Cuban people, it's not a very, very big population, so, like, in some ways these are the sort of connected, this is a sort of sentiment, like, one person usually knows, like, somebody who, like, there's only so many degrees of separation. The people are really connected in a sense of, you know, like, a shared commitment and a shared kind of body and a shared kind of sense of duty, in the sense that, like, sure, there may be certain fears, or sure, there may be certain, dangers of, like, knowing that, like, if they could do that to Venezuela, then, like, could something like this happen here? Absolutely. But we are here to meet that, as you were saying. And it is something that I want to share because it helped me take this figure of 32 young men and women killed in combat and actually give it a human face, and piece, like, you know, that human side of that story into, and obviously I think we've all been seeing photos and images and videos from, like, the way in which the remains of those Cubans were sent back to Cuba. Like, it's like the coffins being taken down from those planes. It's, I mean, like any major city, like, the airport is quite far away from the city itself, so it has to drive along a very long road into the center of the city. But all along the road, you can really see all those people who've come out and wept. And from one of my former instructors who posted a video, like, her own photo and her own participation, she's like, the silence really disarmed me. And it was the silence of everybody who came out with that sense of discipline and duty to like witness it. It was so disarming because I think they knew the weight of this and because they knew that they had to be prepared, even after all of the things that the U.S. had done to, make it very difficult, like the embargo and then also all this propaganda directed at the Cuban people to still stand strong and defend the legacy of the Cuban Revolution and of Fidel, and to make almost like Venezuela an example, to almost say that you could be next. It is really frightening, but at the same time, you can tell that like, here is a people ready in a way that the U.S. people one day should become ready to actually know its inheritance and defend it. And it has been something, I think the way that we're talking more and more in linking, say, Fidel to King, or linking, like, asserting that the Cuban Revolution is something that helps us be more clearly the contribution of something like the civil rights movement, not because one's an armed struggle, a guerrilla struggle that like ousted, seized state power, and the other is like a civil disobedience protest. No, they're both nonviolent revolutions with a high degree of ideological but also moral character that sought the transformation of people and the nation. And yeah, that is something that I do genuinely have to remind myself that in these times of so much confusion and so much turmoil, and then so much of that possibility of violence, that is actually what we have to reach for.
Can I just say something, please? Well, first of all, no people grieve like the Cuban people. They grieve silently, but mothers weep, fathers weep. They are human beings. But as a collective, no people grieve like the Cuban people. It is kind of a grief that emerges from a recognition of the moral cause and the moral cost. But I'm listening to you all, and the sense of fear and anxiety, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be there. It should. But I think what helps us is our unity, our togetherness, and a sense of a common purpose. And each of us knows we can depend on the other. But the other thing is our resoluteness. And, the recognition that we fight to uphold a revolutionary legacy, and that we know that people far beyond us recognize and appreciate what we are doing here. I can't tell you, don't be afraid. Fear is a natural human response to danger. And as all of you all say, it's a dangerous time. But I think, what helps me deal with it, first of all, my experience having seen this before, and maybe being able to connect certain dots, but also this knowledge increasingly that I'm coming to, what King called in his 3 dimensions of a complete life, a cosmic partnership. Mm-hmm. There are forces that link us with the world that we are not aware of, that we cannot touch, that we cannot quantify. And in that sense, we can go forward knowing that we are not alone. And we are not. you know, and of course, I'm going to have to play back and listen to this free school again, because some of what has been said here exceeds anything that I've heard before. And so I just want, if I could say anything to ease your fear or your anxiety, I would only say be confident that we are not alone, that we're part of history, and that we're part of a cosmic partnership. And I think the evidence is everywhere. I mean, Seraphim, she recognizes y'all in ways that, you know, is so important, and just on and on and on. So that's what I would say. I just hope that I can be there for you all. And don't be overcome with fear. You know, keep your eye on the prize. Know what we're doing. Know the work that we're doing. And I think we have more to be confident about than to be afraid of. The world is being transformed before our very eyes. But this is what we want. Really, this is what we've signed up for. We said this is where we wanted to be, how we wanted to fight. And we have worked over these years to prepare ourselves. And I think that there's no other group and no other organization in this society that is more prepared than we are. Believe me, I've seen a lot of organizations, been a part of organizations. There is nothing like the Saturday Free School. Nothing like it. That's all I want to say.
I forgot to say one last line, but actually, as you were speaking, it reminded me that the reason why I prattled off all those details for that video was actually to say the final line, which actually when you spoke reminded me, which is that friend of Junior said that I'm going to keep talking about Junior because that's my way of fighting back and what killed him. She doesn't know what killed him. They don't know exactly what happened that evening on the morning of the 3rd. It could have been very brutal. It could have been very quick. We don't know.
Yes.
But the way we talk about someone like Emmett Till or Natasha McKenna reminds me of that same way of like, we will not stop talking about this because that's our way of fighting back. And you're right. Like I shouldn't have maybe portrayed, the Cuban people as like, too fearful. But there is, that element's more so that like their way of resisting looks more and more. It reminds me more and more of how we think. So, our task, our need for 30, our way of resisting in a way that I think people do.
And I think for us, in speaking about these martyrs, they become a part of us. The more we talk about them, they become a part of us, and they live through us, and that is beautiful, to give life to those who the enemy thought they had killed, making them immortal. And we're doing that. And I think I agree with you. We can learn so much from the Cuban people, among other things, how they grieve. And they grieve deeply. They do grieve very deeply. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it is not in a corner somewhere where my grief is a private thing. No, we don't go into a corner. We go to the people. We come to each other. And this is why, believe me, what we're doing in the Saturday Free School is really in a lot of ways a gift to this country and to the people of Philadelphia. It is recognized increasingly as such.
I just say about the idea of martyrdom
Yes.
is I've been thinking a lot about Joan of Arc, who believed that she was sent by God to save France and the king of France, and she convinced a lot of people. But that was the founding myth of the modern state of France. And I talked previously about founding myths like the Aeneid and there are other founding myths, and it's important for human beings to have founding myths. But since the Enlightenment, it's become increasingly difficult for human beings to produce myth or produce religion. And we've talked about white gods and black gods, and we've said that the white gods are the gods of the petrodollar, capitalism, football, celebrity, everything that we've previously named. And the black god is the black god that is worshipped and man is divine.
Yeah.
And I think it's, so I'm responding to Shantanu, what he said about, no one knows what you said, Shantanu. The myth, the civilizational, what did you say? I'm just kidding. No, I mean, what you said about civilizing man, fuck it, I'll just take the NOI language. Man, civilizing man, and the basis community development on the basis of self-development. And what the Afro-American has confronted before anybody else is this modern question of refounding civilization. And to your point, Shantanu, the music, the religion, the art, all contain the values, the morality, and it's an expression of it. And to what we were saying earlier about James Baldwin saying, "Oh, the white man is the devil." Well, what's the devil's tool? The devil's tool is deception and falsehood. And white people, the main issue is them lying to themselves that they are white to begin with, or that African Americans aren't human beings, or Gazans aren't human beings, with all the rights that entails. And lastly, I just wanted to end on the division and the turmoil, because in my opinion, it was manufactured by the far right, because most of the illegal immigrants are in California and Texas, and ISIS doesn't operate there because they have an arrangement with the agricultural industry not to arrest those people. And so this YouTuber Nick Shirley did a quote unquote expose. He even it's basically what's that organization called, the far right, the Veritas Project. He did a hit and run smear job on Tim Waltz and the Somali community in Minnesota. The Somali community in Minnesota, along with the progressive Jewish community, make up the political base in Minnesota. And that area, the Midwest, I've been to the Midwest, I think Madison, Michigan, what's the other one? St. Paul, and I can't remember, I think I said Madison. They're all very progressive states, and they're not confrontational people. What Trump has done is he's sent ICE to those states to literally cause a problem to get back at Tim Waltz. And this whole Somali community thing and the attack on the Somali community, it's really just racist muckraking by a white teenager who he also went to Gaza to report on aid going from Israel to Gaza. So he's getting paid as an influencer. But it's a manufactured crisis by the far right, and it's manufactured by those elements that I hated Charlie Kirk for, that are super racist and advocating white nationalist conspiracy theories like Europe has fallen, and there's but these are the forces that have captured Donald Trump, and they claim to be the pro-America patriot forces that have inherited America, but they violated habeas corpus, which is goes all the way back to the Magna Carta, which says that all U.S. citizens, all human beings are deserving of due process and the right to see a judge. And ever since the Bush administration, habeas corpus has been suspended in this country. And because of the explaining to PERBA officials, like, why can they cover their faces and why can they operate the way they do? A lot of it has to go with the Patriot Act and the fact that all of that is consolidated under the Department of Homeland Security.
Yeah.
So they can say that they're fighting a war in this country, a war against fentanyl, a war against crime, and all this is to say in the fight to recreate, it goes back to what I was saying about martyrs, the fight for the reimagining of this country. What did we say about King? He was the
Father of a new nation.
the father of a new nation. So I think it'll be important in the 250th anniversary to really understand, well, what is this nation all about? If we don't have habeas corpus, how can you claim? And I'll just, because Kathy talked about, I'll throw in one more jab, which is that Marco Rubio, who's taking control of Trump currently, he comes from the Miami Cuban community, and in the JFK files that they were released, it's been revealed that the Miami Cuban community was part of a worldwide conspiracy against democracy. So they really don't have a right to talk about bringing democracy to Venezuela. And then, I would bring up,
But see, isn't this the point? That in the name of white supremacy, they have abandoned even the fiction of law and morality. It's so, that's all.
I wanted to add, because the precise thing I was trying to ask Samir is, why do these ICE agents not look like agents but thugs? Why is it, I guess maybe uniform is not really, why is their entire appearance different from what you would expect from law enforcement in general? And my mind has been boggled by this. They look like thugs. They look like hired contractors.
They're trying to make that statement.
They're trying
to present themselves that way. That's the point of dressing like these paramilitary.
To intimidate.
And that's the thing that I'm trying to understand, because it does have a deliberate, it's deliberately set up that way. And I think somebody brought up the question of the state, maybe it was Emily. It raises a lot of questions about, the state, and in the year of the 250th anniversary of the founding of the American Republic, where even what you were bringing up about, what's her name, Bilal.
Rochelle
Bilal. And in general, in a lot of these cities, a lot of videos are circulating now of, say, the NYPD also clashing with ICE agents and so on, so police departments across different states and so on. And I don't know how to fully understand all of that, but how does the question of governance and what the American state represents and the relation of the federal government with the states and so on.
It's a complex political.
And I think it's all blown up and needs to be figured out from scratch almost to understand what these things are. And that's just something I wanted to put on the table, because I don't fully understand it yet.
Number one, I gotta apologize for having been so late. I'm not a morning person by any stretch of the imagination. I'm a morning person after 12 o'clock midnight, if you know what I mean. I just want to say one quick thing, a couple of quick things. One, I think, and Samir and I talked about this a while ago, I just think that one of the things that we gotta try to figure out, I'm not so sure it can quote unquote be figured out, is the presence and the necessity of love in terms of what we're up to and about. That's what I experienced with this group. You know what I mean? I mean, the ability to recognize the humanity of other folks and to affirm the humanity of other folks. And that doesn't happen unless something about love is present. That doesn't happen in relationship to Black folks in this country. It doesn't happen in relationship to, Emmett Till's murder. It doesn't happen in relationship to what's going on in Gaza and Palestine right now. If you can't, or Sudan, if you can't grasp the humanity of the folks who are suffering, then your heart is closed to it. And, all of the imperialism, supremacist, racist stuff and so forth, the door gets open to it. I think the other thing that crosses my mind about the importance of something approaching love is that, in a way, we got to rely on each other. I can't tell you the number of things in my life I've seen that have fallen apart because of the fact that folk who had been in the struggle fall out with each other and begin to develop all of this kind of enmity toward each other and so forth. And therefore, important, worthwhile causes get lost. That was, by the way, the agenda behind COINTELPRO in this country in relationship to the movement. I mean, it's just a stone cold reality of it. The other thing about love is that that business of a cosmic thing that we're a part of. I have the feeling when I'm scheming about issues that have to do with what justice is about, my wife is somewhere checking it out, saying, well, I'll be damned. That Negro is still doing what I had to put up with for 53 years. You understand where I'm coming from? And I think she says it with a smile. I mean, she did have to put up with it, but God bless her, she put up with it. I think there's a biblical phrase, the cloud of witnesses. I think there is one heck of a lot of folks whom we love but don't see any longer, who are circling somewhere and so forth and cheering us the heck on. Don't quit. Don't throw in the blasted towel. Don't let the foolishness beat you down. I had a good friend who was a kid at the church where I was ordained at. He's now in his 60s. And life for him has just been rough. 2 kids that are in rough places. His marriage is rough. His mother died about a year before my wife died. And so, and one of the kids was talking to us. I was talking. It was at a restaurant up in Jenkintown. And I finally looked at him and I said, Chris, how do you handle all this stuff? And without missing a beat, he just says, I stick my head in the sand. I just think that we definitely need each other and need to be able to speak with folks who struggle to hear so that we can take our heads out of the sand and hopefully in that process figure out what the heck, can we do. I'm absolutely convinced that there are all sorts of folks whom we do not see. Look at Blaise Pascal said, the heart has reasons that reason does not understand. I am absolutely convinced that folks like Gandhi, like Martin, like Howard and Sue Thurman, like Benjamin Mays, like Tagore, all these people, I don't even know them all, you know what I mean? But I'm absolutely convinced when you gather like this, when you got that ability to listen to each other like this, when you got that ability to recognize and affirm the humanity of others, I don't care what race, gender, blah, all that baloney is about. I think that crowd of people is cheering us the heck on. And I think they will continue to do that until, what's that they said coming out of Mozambique?
A luta
continuum. The struggle continues, and victory is certain.
Victory is certain.
It's certain. Like, I don't know, nothing. But I think they're there. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, about that. Doesn't mean that they're easy on us, right? That doesn't mean that we can rely on them to wave some collective magic wand from beyond. I said it.
Yeah.
Thank you again for not throwing anything at me for being so late.
Well, I wanted to say regarding Reverend Ike, what you were saying, I think in some ways for people, at least for me, there's two kinds of touchstones. One of which is like Du Bois's idea of the immortal child,
Yes.
which is what we owe to the children of this world and to the generations who have not yet been born. But then there's another kind of touchstone, which is our relationship to the dead, as you said, the cloud of witnesses. And in many ways, those two for me are the sacred kind of bond that any human can make is to the children and to the dead.
Mm.
And it's a kind of promise or a covenant that you make that you have to make the choice to honor it. Because in many ways, it's like, I don't know how best to explain it, but it's like, for me, part of what was so important about, especially over the past couple of years, was like, as a person in the society going through what happened with like what's been happening with Gaza, the genocide, and you have to make this kind of choice to be like, oh, I have a debt to these people. I have a debt to these children who died. I have a debt to these people who were not just victims, but also struggled and met death with courage.
Mhm.
And I don't know, for me, there's a kind of sacredness to that that I think is part of what makes you a human being or worthy of being a human being to begin with. And I think that, because yeah, I was thinking about what, you know, Shantanu brought up with Emmett Till Mobley and the choice not just to publicize what happened, but to share her grief and the desire for justice with the nation and with the world. And for anyone who's gone through the death, not just the death of a family member, but the death of a child, I think it's very easy to underestimate how much it took for someone like Emmett Till Mobley to want to share that with people. Most people are not going to make that choice. I know from personal experience, most people want it to be private and they want to grieve privately. And there's something that's very understandable. And that's very human. And so I think the choice that she made to share that with people
Was it revolutionary?
it was revolutionary.
There's no question about
And
it. There's no question.
yeah, and I think it's very hard to fathom actually what it took for her to do that. And I think the other thing regarding this concept of martyrdom of the dead is that I do think that in the way that Reverend Ike was talking, it allows you to feel like you're not alone.
Yeah.
In the same way that, you know, having people in your life, having comrades, having people that you love allows you to feel like you're not alone. I think it changes your consciousness to have all these people in your head and like in your heart too. And I think that when that's expanded on a larger scale, that is what we mean by like new types of human beings, like a new civilization, a civilization in which people actually carry that with them and they have that consciousness of, I'm going to honor the people who came before me and who gave something for me in order that I could be there and so that my brother or my sister could also be here. And I don't know, yeah, I just think that is really important as like an actual shift. Those are the kinds of things that we mean when we talk about a new kind of human being and a new civilization is like in a society in which people are not given the tools psychologically and morally to even grapple with death.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that Baldwin has really taught me is like Americans, like part of what motivates it is like it is in many ways like the fear of death that confronts a lot of people and what drives a lot of the kind of unspoken psychological motivations. And in many ways, it's also the fear of death without meaning, I think, which drives a lot of people. But then again, that's part of what I understand for myself, even as part of the covenant, the sacred bond that you make with the dead, is we are the ones who, in many ways, help to fulfill and honor the meaning of those who have died. And yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to add that. I was really moved by what Ike said, and I think this is very different in tone, but part of what I think is driving on the political level when Trump is doing is that, like Samir said, he wants the crisis. Because actually, if you think about it, the theory of the case that I think people in the Trump administration have is that they saw the George Floyd protests as advantageous for them because they were able to be like, look at the riots and look at the disorder, and they were able to capitalize on that. Basically, there's like, if you're in touch with like basically if you like look at a lot of the internal like mythos of like MAGA world, a lot of what is very like their starting point was basically like the George Floyd protests and like the anarchy and the chaos of that moment. And so I think that Trump wants those kinds of scenes, and it's actually very important that he went back to Minneapolis to basically try to generate a new form of that kind of people rioting, unrest, and all that stuff, in order to then justify like, I'm going to basically swoop in and offer like order to the American people or something like that. I think that that's part of it, at least part of the administration, is they want those scenes of confrontation.
But it's not working.
But it's not working.
And
they've overestimated the hand.
And that is why I think it is so important that Renee Nicole Good be connected to Natasha McKenna, especially Natasha McKenna. Her martyrdom we saw in all its graphic detail. And I very much agree with you that all of the politicians, Democratic and Republican politicians, that think this is a political moment, they're going to be fooled. This is a moment where people will have to come to a moral reckoning. I'm very moved by your words, Shantu. And in so doing, they will have to make other choices. I'm of the opinion that young people who are the main forces fighting in Minneapolis, just like the 100 campuses, are not going to settle for anything less. And that's the difference between 2020 and now. And just a small thing. And then to connect the martyrs of this struggle to Cuba, and to recognize what Cuba actually is, not what some leftists want it to be. It is a moral project. And Fidel and King and people such as these replace the authorities, let us say, of the church itself. The Pope is meaningless and irrelevant in the face of Fidel and Martin Luther King. What can he has nothing to say, you know? There is no bishop. There is no pulpit worthy of Fidel Castro. And I guess that's a hard thing to say in a religious setting. I wanted to say it last week, but this is what you must become You must become like Fidel Castro if you are worthy of the pulpit from which you speak. There is a criteria, moral criteria, which we all must be judged by. And I think if we can embrace this concept right now, it will not only, and like you say, it is a manifestation of love, and it is. It is. And the free school is, in fact, a manifestation of love in the real sense. If that becomes our enterprise, if we can say to anyone who wants to hear that our moral imperative arises from King and Fidel and Gandhi and yada, 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 yada. But I think we are redefining what a revolution is in this country. And I think the people are helping us to see this. To see this.
Yeah, well, there's a concept.
And I just want to say immortality. The immortal child, the immortal martyr. The immortality, there is no death unless we allow the physically dead to die.
Yeah, what you're saying reminded me of the concept. There's this concept in Father Divine's Peace Mission, which is that rather than starting with democracy, he says that actually the goal of Father Divine's Peace Mission is to make brotherhood. So brotherhood is a divine concept of love between human beings, and that democracy is the execution of that divine concept of brotherhood. And it's kind of deep because when you were talking about Martin Luther King Jr. and Fidel and how you were a little shy to like go all the way there in the religious context, is I remember once Nanita saying, she was like, I think it was a genuine question where she was like, do you think that Martin Luther King Jr. could be considered a black god, like a new god? And at the time I was like, whoa, that's a little crazy, don't go there, because like we're still talking about real churches and mosques with historical constitution, with the historical history. But then the more we talk in free school, the more we're also defining the epoch we're in, this transition phase between the epoch of Europe to the epoch of humanity.
Yes.
Or that we have this revolutionary class of capitalists had emancipated the productive forces of man, but we're in a stage where we have not yet emancipated man himself. And that is the stage of modernity we're at, where people like Fidel and Martin Luther King Jr. have to be seen as, in some ways, gods of a new human religion, a new religion of humanity itself. And because Fidel, honestly, some of his speeches are really, the essence of what he's saying is really not that different than King. Even the concept that there is a dimension, that even his concept of like Fidel will always say, my homeland is not Cuba, my homeland is humanity. To say something like that, you know? And, but I wanted to also bring up the state, because I do think what makes the situation today complex is that I actually think in some ways there's two levels of discussion, even coming out of the Battle of Minneapolis, which is you do have the civilizational level of like, what does it mean to be an American? Not in terms of law, but in terms of like straight up, what does it mean to be an American in terms of unity of the people? Because in Cuba, I think what's deep about Cuba is Fidel, when you actually do a real study of the Cuban Revolution, we're not talking about the seizure of state power. The July 23rd, July 26th, July 26th movement. That's not the real revolution. The real revolution is not the seizure of state power. The real revolution are the decades after to make a people. That is the revolution. And hence, here in the 250th year of America's history, the question is not about the creation of the Constitution, but rather how to make certain ideals concrete. What does it mean to be an American in the concrete? It's not citizenship even by law anymore. We're not talking about the 15th Amendment. We're talking about really what are the uniting ideals to make Americans American. And like actually even Ross Douthat had this article that was kind of bad. It was a pretty bad article. It was about how do you define Trump's presidency. He was using like political theory from some dude, like talking about like disjunctive presidencies, like Carter and Hoover, which is about people who are presidents who are in an unhappy transition between something old and new. And you have reconstructive presidents like Reagan and Roosevelt who are actually forming the new era of America. And Douthat is basically saying like, there's no category for Trump. But the funny thing is that even when you look at polls of Trump himself and how dissatisfied people are with the administration, we're not actually polling Trump himself anymore, or even the political administration. All these polls have to be seen as polls of the American people unsatisfied with the home they're in, the house they're stuck in. That they're like, I'm not satisfied with the structures that exist anymore because there's a lacking of meaning. There's a lacking of what it even means to be an American.
That is it.
And but yeah, Douthat does say something interesting where he was like, he ends his essay by saying like, oh yeah, Trump is a new historical character where his legacy is demolition and all he's left America with are like dowdy new towers that have weak foundations, and we're awaiting the true founding of the nation. And in some ways it is a helpful concept to understand why there's such complexity. But I do think coming out of Minneapolis, there is the two levels of, there is the actual, like what Kerbo is bringing up about, like, it's very confusing how for the first time you're seeing I do feel like the first time in a long time, we're seeing like a real conflict between federal law, federal forces, and state law, state forces, state leaders.
That was Arkansas, the battle over the integration of the high school. You know, this is an old struggle that does not go away. But
it doesn't go anywhere because
you know, at the essence of it is the American people's misunderstanding of freedom.
Yes.
And this goes back to the American Revolution. You know, they don't want to be slaves, while most of y'all were having slaves. But anyway, but see, it's all this confusion, and the resolution of it is in the Black movement, in this concept of gods of the oppressed, of the poor, Black gods. And I think this, you know, how does this confusion get resolved? You know, the white way is the violent way.
Yes.
At this point, turning on one another. But how is it resolved? And I think we have the resolution. This is the Baldwinian. I'm so appreciative of the research that y'all do on Baldwin, because I don't read as well as all of it that you do. But the Baldwinian resolution, and it is, he is addressing in most of his essays white people. And so the resolution of the contradiction is in the transformation of white people. That's the key. And so the existence of Black gods, of man as divine, gives white people the example of how you must be. We work this through Black Reconstruction, so much of Du Bois and then Baldwin, and it is so perfectly clear that the options for white people have narrowed to the point where it's now existential. Either you abandon this or you die in the fight for it, which would be the coward's way out. Whiteness is the coward's way. You listen to them. You listen to the Nick Fuentes. You listen to the Stephen, any of them. And And what they come off as putrid cowards. Cowards. I would use the B word, but we're in a church, you know what I'm saying? But that's what I would say. And even Ross do that, or Brooks, who are the best commentators, you know, in the New York Times and stuff. They are confused because they want to talk about religion and return to religion. But what gods? I'm not talking about religion, I'm talking about your God. Now, and therefore I'm getting more existential. I'm getting in your house now. I'm not talking about religion. Continue with your religion. I want to know who your gods are. And once I know who your gods are, I know who you are. Because the thing of your gods and you, or your gods and man. Because if your God is wrong, you ain't going to see man as divine. And they can't. And the only way out is the black way. And I cooked dinner for Shantu and Alice last night, and I sent them this YouTube. Did he send it to you? Okay. About this white woman who is a Muslim.
Oh, never mind. I saw that.
And she opens by saying Assalamu alaikum, like that, like a member of the Nation of Islam, by the way. And then she goes into a brief discussion of the white man as the devil. And what she says is that you all have misrepresented the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and took it out of context. She said, but the question is for us to reflect upon our own history. Who are we? Which gets back to the man and God and good and evil and, you know, such and such. Because it is true. And I think this is in Father Divine, it's in the Honorable Elijah, it's in all of them, that men can become devils or they can become gods. They can become evil or they can become divine. You know what I'm saying? And this is now on the table. They can die or they can become immortal. It's just the whole, how you choose on this question reverses everything. Is God in the sky? Is God down here? Is heaven in the sky or is heaven possibly down here? Are angels somewhere or are angels men and women? All of these, which constitutes, I said this to Jeremiah, this looks more like a second Protestant Reformation, if you want to use that, because it is a revolution from within Protestantism, or what appears to be Protestantism. It's hard to say when you talk about Black people, whether they're Protestants or whatever, not, you know, but let's say from within existing religion of the United States, a revolution is underway. And by the way, it goes back to the 1930s. It didn't just start. But yeah, a revolution of meaning. That's Baldwin. That's the Baldwinian solution. I think we could call it that. And there are others. If I don't tell them. There is a Honorable Elijah Muhammad solution. His solution is that white men must become Muslims, which is another way of saying white men must reject their white religion. Father Divine has another solution. These are not dissimilar solutions, but they're possibilities for white people. Father Divine says that a moral government of the people must be governed on the basis of moral values. And for him, the best instances of this was the Declaration of Independence and the American Constitution. By the way, I would say for him, as starters, let's start there, since everybody knows this is the 1930s, Then you have the Fidel solution. That is a similar, parallel. Then you have Martin Luther King's solution. So there are any number of solutions to the crisis of white folk. Do they want a way out? And the ball, I think the ball is in your court now. You cannot close your eyes to it, even though, one of the things of the way white people behave, they try to act, well, I didn't know. They always go to that. After they're warmed up. Oh, I didn't know it was that bad. No one ever told me. They're always the innocent, victimized white person. Hometown, it ain't gonna work this time. But that's what
I'm really interested in this Father Divine, moral government question, because I think in some ways, with the crisis of the state, it forces the question of where authority comes from. Where is authority actually derived? And people want to locate it in different places, whether it's precedent, due process, the law, our tradition. But I feel like this question of where is authority derived and the possibility that it comes from moral strength or being a moral example. And I feel like that's actually where we see the greatest capacity or the movement towards democracy, which is recognition of the moral imperative and unity around what that is. And I think that's even where basically this consolidation around the idea of the mortal child or the idea of the immortal martyr.
Immortal martyr.
And it's also thinking about this idea of the moral remaking of the nation and looking at Cuba and the decades-long process of revolution that has morally remade the people. And I think it makes me ask the question of, has there been initiated a moral remaking of the people in the United States with the civil rights movement? And if so, where do we stand? Because it's obviously incomplete. It's not finished.
Yes.
But I also can't say that it hasn't started.
No, it definitely.
It has begun.
Yes.
And so I guess, can we take stock of how far we have come and what still needs to be done? And I think Cuba and Fidel is kind of a mirror in some ways for the American people of what could have been if we continue on the way of actually morally remaking our nation and our people. And I think, Fidel and King, they have so much in common, whether it's this idea of the single garment of destiny or all humanity as a concept. But I think even this thing of the Good Samaritan and aid, of actually helping another. Because Fidel, he was saying that the spirit of aid, he was don't get it twisted. He says, let no one think that a people loses something when it helps another. When a people helps another, it's not a loss, but rather a gain. He says, our country loses nothing by sending a doctor to a country like Algeria, Yemen, Tanzania, Somalia, or Angola. In fact, the country gains by doing this because it gains a professional who has become more conscientious, more revolutionary. And he's our country didn't lose anything by sending 900 construction workers to Vietnam. We gained because today those workers constitute enthusiastic and magnificent nuclei in our construction industry. And he says, basically, our revolutionary awareness and our political development gain from it. This attitude on the part of our people to be ready to fight and to be ready to help in one field or another is a source of pride for any revolutionary party. It constitutes a good indicator of our people's maturity and revolutionary awareness. And then he says, this is why the imperialists are always wrong about Cuba, because they don't have the standards with which to measure such moral issues. They simply can't gauge the spirit and the conscience of a people. He says they were wrong at Playa Girón, and they made another mistake when they planned the invasion of Angola. And just this thing that then he says, the most important thing about a country is not its wealth. The imperialists have plenty of it. The most important thing about a country is its conscience and its spirit. And so I think assessing the state of the people and the state of the people, I think on the 250th anniversary, I don't think it can just be evaluating the Constitution was a great document. like, let's actually assess the democratic capacity of the people. And I think even this move of like the logic or the standards by which we live, and that the standards of world humanity are not the standards of whiteness.
No.
And the logic of what moves people or what people will actually struggle for and fight for can't be predicated on the white logic or the white standards of just like power or brutality. But yeah, I think Cuba and the Cuban people, I think, are evidence of what actually would come out of a revolution of values, unhindered or like able to have like state power, and what it would value and what it would nurture. So,
Yeah, that question of Cuba, it's not really the seizure of state power, but the decade-long struggle to remake. I think that helped clarify, the emphasis we lay on the defeat of Reconstruction in thinking about the 250th anniversary. Because if anything, that was like the process of making true, like what Emily said, to make true brotherhood that makes democracy, possible, and to really like demolish the foundations of white supremacy, not just in governance and statehood and all of that, but in relation, that was the process, and its defeat really then becomes what you must confront when you're trying to answer the question of 250 years after the founding of the republic, what does it stand for, and what do Americans, what is their identity, what they're supposed to think about themselves. And the other thing I really wanted to lift, because I just don't want to forget it, is how Nuri talked about the martyr as somebody who really like resolves the question of who is man and who is God.
Yes.
And I think that way of saying it was very both moving and also clarifying, because it's really when you conquer or you win that battle over fear of self-preservation or whatever,
Yes.
for a moral cause, for something that is broader, bigger than you, for humanity. And I remember how much time we spent talking about the shaheeds of Gaza, and I think that is really, and I really like what you said also, like to always be tied to the immortal martyr and then the immortal child, because I think, not everybody is called upon to give their life for revolution or a moral cause. And there is also like, the tendency of trying to put yourself recklessly in harm's way to try and, sort of quickly deal with the injustice you see around. Even that, like, is not ultimately that something that can be inheritable or, made into a movement or whatever. So I feel like this time really calls for a certain courage or a certain battle that every individual has to win over themselves. Over that fear, over that,
Right.
and I think all of us feel it in our hearts every day. And I really like what Kathy also said, that looking at Cuba and looking at, this interview that you were describing, like to see this as not just something that the Cuban people did, but something that you can learn about the human being itself, to dispel this myth that selfishness, self-interest, moral cowardice are naturally what the human being is attracted to. No, that is the model. And in fact, the white way of life is the aberration. Throughout history, throughout the world, there is evidence that this is the normal way for human beings to be.
Yes.
And I think that's what we are being called on every single day. And I also really appreciated, Kathy, what you said is not like, to win the battle over, fear, to tell yourself that, no, I have to stand here and fight. I'm not going to, I don't have the luxury of running away. And something similar, I think, Reverend Ike, you were bringing up the story about returning from the Middle East and, looking at some Black people talking about, and then making that decision that, no, you can't really, like, this is where the struggle is. And it doesn't do to run away from this to a place where race, the color line is not so existential day to day and so on. That moved me a lot.
I just want to thank you for that reading from Fidel Castro. I think it was in 2001, I can't remember exactly, at the UN Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa.
Yes.
It was split into three parts, and for the life of me, I can't remember. But the middle part was for non-governmental institutions, and Castro was the main speaker at a cricket stadium or something. That dude talked for 2.5 hours.
Nice.
I don't understand Spanish. Right? He could have gone on for another hour and a half. I mean, that's just that.
Yeah.
And I've never been able to find. I can't find stuff well on the internet. I've never been able to find a copy of his speech. He only had a few pages written. And the pages that he had written were statistics about infant mortality in Europe and North America versus Africa and Asia. Women who die in childbirth, again, Africa and Asia versus North America and Europe. After the conference was over, I had stopped in London for the flight back to the United States. And it's announced that all flights to this country have been canceled. And they tell, I forgot what airline I was on, but they say everybody flying such and such an airline, go to such and such a place. And so there's this young person talking about the fact that these buildings have been hit by planes in New York and therefore all the flights. First thing that crossed my mind was what Castro had said. The incidence of infant mortality, mothers dying in childbirth, the wealth of the wealthiest families in this country versus the wealth of the majority of countries in the world. And you just realize, of course there's going to be that kind of, violent reaction. I mean, you don't like to see it and all of this kind of business, but it's just, but that dude, I mean, his ability to talk like that, and the woman who was translating into English, the people that understood Spanish would be clapping and cheering, and you couldn't hear what the sister was. It didn't matter. He just captured something that blew my mind. I mean, it really,
Okay, this is not to get too a Christian about it, but because someone made a comment, I think it was Nathan Reddy, who said that Jesus Christ was also a martyr, and perhaps the most famous example. I do think that it's true that Christ was a martyr, and he's a martyr who still, in many ways, especially in the most creative dimensions of, I don't know if we call it Black Christianity, the Black religious movements from the 20th century into today, like the martyrdom of Christ, I think is still an important example and touchstone for many people. But I think it's also fair in the way that Emily was asking, is it possible that Martin Luther King was a martyr who would have the same level of impact on world humanity that Christ did?
It is a question.
It's a question, and one that may not be resolved even within the span of our lifetimes, but will take more time. But I wanted to bring it up because when you look at the Christ story, Christ is at his both most human, the closest to humanity, and the closest to God at the point of the crucifixion. In part because right before he's crucified, that is when Christ goes to the garden and basically asks God, do I have to do this? Because he knows what's about to happen. That's him at his most vulnerable. Like, do I have to go through with this extraordinary pain of going up on the cross, basically? And yet it is at that moment that Christ, especially when he's on the cross and suffering, that's when he's the closest to humanity, to suffering humanity, but it's also when he's the closest to God and to divinity. That is the moment of transcendence. And I think in a similar way, if you, and then, yeah, I don't know if these things are faded, the parallels between like Christ and Martin Luther King, but King in a similar way, in that documentary, he has that moment when he's like, he has that nervous tick.
Yes.
And Harry Belafonte relays this conversation that they have where Belafonte is like, well, at some point, King's tick vanished, his nervous tick. And King is like, it's because I made peace with death. And that is both King at his most human and his most vulnerable, but it's also the point at which King becomes so much larger than just one man that becomes a figure for world humanity. And I think that in some ways, like, when you connect it to even the 250th, I was listening to this podcast interview with Ken Burns, and Burns was like, I think George Washington was the greatest American to ever live.
Who said that?
Ken Burns, who made this documentary series. And it actually is very extraordinary that you wouldn't even consider Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
But it's also because, it's in part because Martin Luther King, more than perhaps any other American, is not just one who belongs to the American people, but really does belong to world humanity. And world humanity recognizes him as such.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what we mean when we talk about the Black struggle as being that bridge from a dying white civilization to
humanity.
being embracing and being embraced by world humanity. And it's also, the last thing is that today actually is 2 days ago was the birth anniversary of King.
Yes.
Today is the birth anniversary of Muhammad Ali. And similarly, Ali may be the most famous human being who's ever existed, especially during his time. I don't know if you guys would agree with that, but that is a measure of Ali being embraced by the world's people, by darker humanity, because of how much he loved darker humanity and all of the sacrifices he made as a human being in the face of his own government. I think, I know we've talked about this, but there's also so many things that connect King and Ali. But it's like, those are the men, those are the human beings who've come out of this society, this dark society, and been the most embraced by the world's people. And I think that says a lot. So
can I just a small, I guess, and I'm not theologically as competent as you are, but one of the things is for people who are not Christians to deal with is the Trinity. That there's a father who sent his son. Well, son is a metaphor or a way to talk about a derivative of God, an expression of God, of the divine concept. But in order to return to God, he had to be martyred and become Holy Spirit, an anointed or elevated spirit. In this regard, you could almost, and it will take some time to finally say this, that Martin Luther King fit into the Christian concept of martyrdom as a conditionality for becoming a Holy Spirit and immortality. In the ways that we're speaking about all of the people that we're speaking about, and how even grief, long-term grief, is the way of the living to reconcile themselves to God. It is, the metaphors when made into concrete human beings make all the sense in the world. And, it just seems to me that Father Divine was taking the metaphors and humanizing them for our time. And I think we do have to acknowledge that some martyrdoms are necessary for us to understand who these people were. We are only now getting closer to understanding Emmett Till's martyrdom. And to know at 14, when they tried to beat him up and intimidate him, he fought. Because he was a kind of a chunky young kid, he fought. And they were going to teach him a lesson. And it's almost the metaphor of the cross and torture is what he experienced. You can even see it in Natasha McKenna. You said you weren't going to kill me. And then as she struggled for life, she had to accept her death. And it was a brutal one with tasing and such. But I think there's something to this. And I think people like Father Divine, in particular, since I know Kathy has been sending me things, we're trying to make real and give life to things that only had a metaphorical nature and had been interpreted by the white world in all kinds of ways. And I think a big part of this, even with King or Father Divine or any of them, is the question of, is God white? This is a big question in the United States. Most churches, Black churches, have gotten away from the white Jesus. But does that mean that you've gotten away from the white God?
Yeah.
Or the gods of white people? And how far have you gotten away from that? And what goes on in theology schools? Have they solved the question? Or do they want to solve the question? Okay. See, this is a big question. Do the intellectuals, the theologians, the philosophers want this question solved, or do they want to further veil it, to disguise it in a labyrinth of language, to change the language without the substance? And if I might say this, Reverend Ike, I was asking myself recently, because last week we had the AMEs here and the Nation of Islam. I said, where are the Black Episcopalians?
Hell if I know.
Yeah, right. Because I do remember one time here in Philadelphia, there were Black Episcopalian leaders like Father Logan, like Father Anderson, like Father Paul Washington, and a cadre of Black Episcopalians that not only wanted to participate in the Black Power and Civil Rights movement, but to change the racial order within the Episcopal Church. Seemed like everybody done got a job now. But I asked the question, where are the Black Episcopalians? But you don't have to answer that. I mean, don't know.
Take a quick shot at math. One, I've been told, and I'm not sure, that the Black caucus in the Episcopal Church is the only one that's still in existence now. Now, I was there when the group was founded. And incidentally, it was founded because of the fact that a guy who had been at the church in North Philly, Tarley Caution, had gone to the National Church headquarters and was head of what they call the Black Desk. And he was fired summarily. And Black folks came together to protest his firing. And that's what led to the creation of the Union of Black Episcopalians. Jesse Anderson, I think possibly Barbara Harris, etc. But Jesse and Barbara, I think, were first presidents of that group. I think what happened is that, what's that song, Keep Your Eyes on the Prize? I think the mistake was made with that group of taking your eyes off the prize. That's just, I think, the sad reality. The other thing you got to consider in relationship to the Episcopal Church is it has always been a part of quote unquote establishment in this country. I mean, I think there have been more Episcopal presidents than any other. Who cares? And I think that it represented something about assimilation for upwardly mobile Black folks and wanting to be part of it. And it's a miracle in a sense that for a period of time, not just for Black folks in the church, but possibly for a significant number in the church as a whole, regardless of race, decided we need to break from that kind of picture. I just want to point out one thing. I don't know if we all remember it or not, if we got it. There was something called the God is Dead movement in the church.
Oh, in the church?
Oh, yeah. In fact, one of the people who was part of that as a graduate of the seminary that I went to, I always suspected that these were guys on theological faculties who had written books thinking that if they said God is dead, that increases their chances of getting tenure. You know what I mean? And I don't know whether it's true or not. But the truth of the matter is, the hope does become that white God is experienced as being dead. I think I heard that, among us.
Yes.
But saying it and living it, so to speak, are two different things.
Yeah, or saying it and not recognizing the Black gods, or not. I think this is, the God is dead movement, comes out of World War I in Europe and gave kind of concrete expression to the existentialist movement.
Yeah.
And then this is something we've been talking about in our group that reads Taylor Branch. That that King had to grapple with the sacred and the secular in the church and in his theology, because by the time he gets out of Croatian and the University of Boston, secularism had taken over theology. And so God was dead. Or as they would have it, God needs to be dead because God is the opiate of the people. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And that what we need is a moral, almost a systematic or rationalist approach to the problems of man. And we can see, we see that. I think that Cornel West is one of the great exemplars of the secularist in religion, but that is not Martin Luther King. He, I think, stood up to that, even to the extent of saying that Gandhi is the greatest Christian, that we have to go, I have to take a pilgrimage to India, to the East. And I think we find, again, that's why, like the Father Divines and Elijah Muhammad's are seen as a cult or not so smart people, when in fact they were smarter than the people who proclaimed God is dead. Just on this Trinity thing, I think that's one of the contributions of Christianity to world thinking about God. I didn't always think so. I know that the Nation of Islam rejected it and saw Jesus in the traditional Islamic sense as a prophet. But now I see more from Minister Ishmael and Minister Farrakhan, this Christ thing finding its way into their discourse, which moves them further from Orthodox Islam. But the claim of, first of all, by the way, just on the Nation of Islam, the claim that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is a prophet. Traditional Islam says the seal or the last prophet in the tradition of prophecy is Muhammad of the 7th century. The Nation of Islam says that the door to prophecy must be reopened, and another prophet must come to a people who were enslaved and oppressed. And God came to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad with a message, making him a Christ. And that's the way Farrakhan and them interpreted. With God coming to Elijah Muhammad, it was literally making him a son of a father. And his death elevates him to a Holy Ghost or a Holy Spirit. This is, I mean, it's almost as though Black people can't get away from this Trinity. You know, no matter how hard they try. And for the Nation of Islam, now feeling more confident in the second resurrection than they did in the first, are prepared to stand up to Sunni Islam and almost take on a Christian narrative about Christ, a Christ figure, the Christ. They will use that word, the Christ. And they often, I've heard them begin to use it in relationship to Minister Farrakhan. A Christ has come to us. You know, like the song, "Unto us a son is given unto us." You know, what's the next one?
A child is born.
A child is born, and his name shall be Emmanuel. Yeah, you know you. But this idea of a Trinity, well, it sounds like trilectic. But yeah, I think this is very important to a people's understanding of who is God, who is man, what is prophecy, what is transcendence, what is martyrdom, why the death of the Christ is necessary to free the people, because it is only his death which will clarify who he is to the people. And you know, if you listen to the Nation of Islam, I mean, Farrakhan presents this over. You will know who I am when I'm not here any longer. You know, or you will better understand me when I stop speaking. I think so.
I'm gonna read comments.
Okay.
Okay. Sparks, Bombala, John Graves, and others say good morning. Bombala says, I saw Cuban doctors helping in West Africa. And then asked, do white people lack empathy, or do they turn empathy off when the color is wrong? Someone named Maya said, I'm catching the Holy Ghost. It's not even Sunday. That was when you talked. And then Pamela, I think, really resonated with what Emily was saying, said that the ICE officer was angry like a madman because he felt betrayed, that these officers are maniacs with guns. iManifesto says the response or the rage is about not acquiescing to their will and their power. Babla clarifies, what I'm saying is the officer felt more rage because she was white. And then
And a betrayer.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I think, is it Nathan?
Yeah.
Who said Jesus Christ was a martyr, perhaps the most famous example. And then I think Bambala was listing others.
No, those are all names for Jesus.
Names for Jesus? Oh, Emmanuel?
Emmanuel,
Okay.
Yeshua, yeah.
Then Brother Gregory said, peace and blessings, dear family. And Bambala said, yes, people are people's medicine. I think that was in response to Reverend Ike. And then Colin said a slightly late good morning, everyone. Then Nathan is following up on his comment saying, I don't feel the need to contest who is or isn't a prophet or a Christ, especially because I'm Hindu. But I subscribe to the belief that Christ resides first and foremost in the individual, by which I think he means like the human being, the living man. And then those are all of our comments.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for listening and for being here today. So we'll be back next week. Bye.
Bye.